Hello and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so grateful you're here. Let's kick things off with today's story. Roderick Barber's heavy boots thudded against the driveway as he climbed out of his truck. The 24-hour shift at the fire station had left him bone-weary, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his exhaustion. Lives saved, property protected. It was what he'd signed up for. He trudged to the mailbox, rifling through the usual stack of bills and junk mail. An unfamiliar cream-colored envelope caught his eye, addressed to his wife Stacy in flowing script. Curiosity prickled at the back of his neck. Inside, he tossed his keys on the counter and stood in the silent kitchen. The envelope felt heavy in his hands. Without hesitation, he carefully opened the flap. The letter inside made his blood run cold. My dearest Stacy, the memory of our last stolen moment sustains me in this hellhole. I count the days until I can hold you in my arms again, feel your soft skin against mine. Our love is the only thing that keeps me going in here. I dream of the future we'll have together once I'm out. No more hiding, no more lies. Just you and me, baby. We'll leave this town in our rearview mirror and never look back. Remember, only a few more months until I'm free. Stay strong, my love. Soon, we'll have our happily ever after. Forever yours, Carlton. Roderick's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening on the paper until it crumpled. The betrayal hit him like a sucker punch, leaving him winded. But as the initial shock faded, a cold determination settled in its place. He smoothed out the letter, carefully refolding it and sliding it back into the envelope. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. Carlton, an inmate. Stacy, a liar, a cheat. Their entire marriage a sham. But Roderick Barber wasn't a man who acted on impulse. No, he'd get to the bottom of this. He'd uncover every dirty secret before confronting Stacy. And when he did, he'd be armed with the full, ugly truth. Over the next few days, Roderick became a ghost in his own home. He moved silently, gathering evidence while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Stacy, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath her husband's calm exterior, continued her daily routine. Late one night, while Stacy slept, Roderick sat bathed in the blue glow of her laptop screen. His fingers flew over the keys, bypassing her weak password and delving into years of deception. Email after email unfolded before him, each one a dagger to his heart. My darling Carlton, I lied to Roderick again today. Told him I had a staff meeting when really I was coming to see you. It's getting easier each time. He's so trusting, so blind. Sometimes I almost feel bad for him. Almost. I can't wait until you're out. We'll finally be together, without bars or guards between us. Just a little longer, my love. Yours always, Stacy. Roderick's face remained impassive as he dug deeper. Phone records revealed countless calls to the prison. Bank statements showed suspicious withdrawals, money funneled to Carlton's commissary account, no doubt. But the final blow came when he uncovered Stacy's volunteer records at the prison. She'd been going there for years, using her position as a high school guidance counselor to gain access. All those family emergencies and work crises, lies, every single one. As dawn broke, Roderick sat back, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Why don't you tell me, Stacy? She glanced at the papers, recognition dawning. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. Then, like a switch being flipped, her demeanor changed entirely. Well, she said, a cruel smirk twisting her lips, I guess the cat's out of the bag. How long? Roderick asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Stacy laughed, the sound grating against his ears. Years, Rod. God, you're so oblivious. It was almost too easy. And Carlton? He's in prison. What the hell were you thinking? She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. I was thinking that I was bored out of my mind. Carlton's exciting, dangerous. Everything you're not. Roderick's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his composure. So our entire marriage has been a lie? Oh, don't be so dramatic. Stacy rolled her eyes. It wasn't all bad. You're stable, dependable. The perfect cover while I had my fun. And now? Roderick asked, his voice eerily calm. Stacy's eyes gleamed with malice. Now? Now I'm done playing house. Carlton gets out soon, and we're leaving.
Together.
She laughed again, the sound dripping with disdain. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you forever? You're so boring, Rod. So predictable. Roderick stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Get out, he said. Excuse me? Stacy's eyes widened in disbelief. You heard me. Get out.
Now.
Stacy's face contorted with rage. You can't just throw me out. This is my house too. Not anymore, Roderick replied, his resolve unwavering. I want you gone within the hour. Take what you can carry. The rest, I'll have sent to wherever you end up. You'll regret this, Stacy hissed, her mask of superiority cracking. I'll take you for everything in the divorce. You'll have nothing when I'm done with you. Roderick didn't flinch. We'll see about that. Now, get out of my sight. Stacy stormed out of the kitchen, hurling insults over her shoulder. Roderick remained standing, listening to her rage through the house, gathering her things. As the front door slammed shut, Roderick finally allowed himself to sink back into his chair. The house echoed with silence, but for the first time in years, it felt like he could breathe. He looked at the scattered evidence of Stacy's betrayal, his jaw set with determination. She thought she'd won, that she'd break him. But Roderick Barber was far from broken. This was just the beginning. He'd weather this storm, and he'd come out stronger on the other side. Let Stacy and Carlton have their delusions of victory. Roderick knew the truth. The real battle was just beginning, and he was more than ready for war. Weeks crawled by like molasses, each day a reminder of Stacy's betrayal. Roderick threw himself into his work, finding solace in the structured chaos of the firehouse. He'd purged the house of Stacy's presence, but her shadow lingered in every corner. The shrill chime of the doorbell cut through the silence of a lazy Sunday afternoon. Roderick's eyes flicked to his phone, connected to the Ring camera he'd installed after Stacy's departure. His jaw clenched at the sight on the screen. Carlton Hebert stood on his porch, a menacing grin stretched across his face. The ex-gon's prison-honed muscles strained against a too-tight t-shirt, a pitiful attempt at intimidation. In his right hand, a knife glinted in the afternoon sun. Roderick remained calm. He'd prepared for this moment, run through the scenarios 100 times in his head. With deliberate movements, he activated the silent alarm he'd had installed and hit record on his phone. He opened the door, careful to maintain the chain lock. Can I help you? Carlton's grin widened, revealing yellowed teeth. Yeah, you can get the fuck out of my house. Roderick raised an eyebrow. Your house? I think you're confused, friend. This is my property. You're trespassing. Listen here, you piece of shit. Carlton snarled, brandishing the knife. Stacy told me all about you. The boring, predictable Boy Scout. Well, playtime's over. She's with a real man now. Roderick's voice remained steady, betraying none of the disgust roiling in his gut. I'm going to say this once, Carlton. You're violating your parole by being here with a weapon. The police are already on their way. I suggest you leave before they arrive. Panic flashed in Carlton's eyes, quickly replaced by impotent rage. This ain't over, firefighter. I'm gonna ruin your fucking life. You're welcome to try, Roderick replied, his tone icy. Now get off my property before I add assault to your charges. Carlton spat on the porch, a glob of phlegm landing inches from Roderick's feet. He backed away, knife still clutched in his sweaty palm. Watch your back, asshole. You don't know who you're messing with. Roderick watched impassively as Carlton skulked off, his bravado evaporating with each step. Only when the ex-gon's car peeled away did Roderick allow himself a smile. Round one to him. He replayed the recording, satisfaction coursing through him. Another piece of evidence for the inevitable legal battle to come. Stacy and her low-life boyfriend had no idea what they were up against. In a dingy apartment across town, Stacy paced like a caged animal. The place reeked of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, a far cry from the comfortable life she'd thrown away. Carlton lounged on a threadbare couch, eyes glued to a small TV playing reruns of some mindless reality show. Would you sit down already? You're making me dizzy. Stacy whirled on him, eyes flashing. Sit down? How can you be so calm? That bastard made a fool of you. Carlton's face darkened. Watch your tone, babe. Nobody makes a fool of me. Really? Stacy sneered. Because from where I'm standing, Roderick played you like a fiddle. Some big, bad ex-con you are. In a flash, Carlton was on his feet, meaty hand wrapped around Stacy's throat. I told you to watch your fucking mouth. Stacy's eyes widened, fear replacing the contempt. She'd seen this side of Carlton before, but always through the safety of prison visiting room glass. Now, with his fingers digging into her flesh, the reality of her choices came crashing down. Carlton released her, shoving her away. You want revenge on your Boy Scout? Fine, but we do it my way. Stacy rubbed her neck, a plan forming in her mind. I know how to hit him where it hurts. His precious reputation. The next day, Stacy's Honda Civic crept into the parking lot of Fire Station 12. She peered through binoculars, watching the comings and goings of the firefighters. There, she hissed, spotting Roderick climbing into a fire engine. They're leaving for a call. Now's our chance. Carlton grunted, pulling a small bag of white powder from his pocket. You sure this'll work? Stacy's lips curled into a cruel smile. Trust me, once they find drugs in his locker, St. Roderick's halo will slip real quick. They slipped into the station, Stacy's old key card granting them access. The locker room was deserted, rows of identical metal doors lining the walls. Which one's his? Carlton muttered. Stacy pointed. Third from the left. Hurry up. Carlton fumbled with the lock, cursing under his breath. Finally, it swung open. He reached in, ready to plant the drugs. A small red light blinked in the corner of the locker. Carlton froze. What the fuck is that? Stacy's blood ran cold. A camera. That son of a bitch. Before they could react, sirens wailed in the distance. Panic seized them both. Run! Stacy shrieked, bolting for the exit. They barely made it to the car before police cruisers swarmed the parking lot. As they peeled away, Stacy's nails dug into the steering wheel. She'd underestimated Roderick. Again. Across town, Roderick sat in Chief Wallace's office, a laptop open between them. The footage from his locker camera played on repeat, crystal-clear images of Stacy and Carlton's botched frame job. Chief Wallace shook his head, disgust evident on his weathered face. I can't believe it, Barber. Your own wife. Roderick's voice was steady. Ex-wife, sir. And believe me, I'm as shocked as you are. Well, you did good installing that camera. Hate to think what might have happened otherwise. The chief leaned back, fixing Roderick with a stern gaze. You sure you're okay to work? Nobody would blame you for taking some time off. Roderick met his eyes, unflinching. With all due respect, Chief, work is the only thing keeping me sane right now. I need to be here. Wallace nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. All right then, I'll send this footage to the police. They'll want to question you, but it's clear as day what happened here. As Roderick left the office, a commotion erupted in the station. Raised voices, heavy footsteps. He rounded the corner to find two uniformed officers leading a handcuffed Carlton through the bay doors. Their eyes met, Carlton's filled with impotent rage. This ain't over, fireman. You hear me? This ain't fucking over. Roderick watched him passively as they shoved Carlton into a cruiser. Another piece falling into place. He allowed himself a small smile. Let them come. He was ready. The klaxon blared through the firehouse, jolting Roderick from a fitful sleep. He was on his feet in seconds, muscle memory taking over as he donned his turnout gear. We've got a big one, folks. Chief Wallace's voice boomed over the intercom. Factory fire on the east side, potential chemical involvement. Let's move. Roderick's mind snapped into focus, personal troubles evaporating in the face of duty. As he climbed aboard Engine 12, a hand clapped his shoulder. You good, Barber? It was Mike Sanderson, his lieutenant and closest friend on the force. Roderick nodded, jaw set. Always. The scene that greeted them was chaos incarnate. Flames licked the night sky, turning the industrial complex into a vision of hell. Thick, acrid smoke billowed from shattered windows, carrying God knows what toxins. Chief Wallace's voice crackled over the radio. Engine 12, we've got reports of workers trapped on the third floor. East Wing. Get in there and get them out. Copy that, Sanderson replied. He turned to his team, eyes locking with Roderick's. Barber, you're with me. The rest of you, lay lines and prepare for ventilation. Roderick moved without hesitation, SCBA mask in place as they entered the inferno. The heat was oppressive, visibility near zero. But this he understood. This was where he thrived. They found the workers huddled in a break room, terror etched on their soot-streaked faces. Roderick's voice was calm, authoritative. Fire department, we're here to get you out. Stay low and follow us. As they led the group towards safety, a thunderous crack split the air. Roderick's head snapped up, years of experience screaming danger. Floor's giving way, he shouted. Move, move, move. He shoved the nearest worker forward, just as a section of ceiling collapsed. Debris rained down, a burning beam catching Sanderson across the back. The lieutenant went down hard, cry of pain lost in the roar of the flames. Without thinking, Roderick hauled him up, slinging Sanderson's arm over his shoulder. Like hell I'm leaving you behind, he grunted, half dragging his friend towards the exit. They emerged into the night air, Roderick's lungs burning as he gulped in oxygen. Paramedics swarmed them, whisking Sanderson away on a stretcher. For hours, they battled the blaze. Roderick moved like a man possessed, barking orders and diving back into the flames again and again. When the last hot spot was finally extinguished, he stood amidst the smoldering ruins, exhausted but victorious. Chief Wallace approached, face etched with equal parts concern and admiration. Hell of a job in there, Barber. You saved a lot of lives tonight. Roderick nodded, too spent for words. As the adrenaline faded, the weight of everything, Stacy's betrayal, Carlton's threats, the near disaster of the fire, came crashing down. He felt a hand on his arm and turned to find the entire crew of Engine 12 gathered around him. Mike Sanderson, arm in a sling, stepped forward. We heard about what's been going on, Rod, he said, voice gruff with emotion. We want you to know, we've got your back. Always. Roderick looked at the faces of his brothers, seeing nothing but unwavering support. For the first time in weeks, he felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw. Thanks, he managed, voice thick. That means a lot. As dawn broke over the smoky horizon, Roderick stood a little straighter. Let Stacy and Carlton plot their pathetic schemes. He had a family right here, forged in fire and unwavering loyalty. Whatever storms lay ahead, he'd weather them. And he wouldn't do it alone. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse corridor buzzed like angry wasps, matching the tension in the air. Roderick Barber stood tall, his firefighter's uniform crisp and immaculate. Beside him, Ashley Chen cut a sharp figure in her tailored suit, a portfolio clutched in her manicured hands. At the far end of the hall, Stacy's shrill voice carried. I want everything, Shelley. Every last penny. Bleed him dry. Roderick's jaw tightened, but he betrayed no other emotion. Ashley placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We've got this, Rod. Trust me. The courtroom doors swung open, and the battle lines were drawn. Shelley Sharp lived up to her name, all razor edges and shark-like grins. She strode to the plaintiff's table, Stacy in tow like a preening peacock. Your Honor, Shelley began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. My client, Mrs. Barber, has suffered greatly at the hands of her soon-to-be ex-husband. She seeks only what is rightfully hers, half of all marital assets, including Mr. Barber's pension. The judge, a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair, turned to Ashley. And the defense? Ashley rose, calm and collected. Your Honor, we contest Mrs. Barber's claims entirely. Moreover, we have extensive evidence of Mrs. Barber's infidelity, financial misconduct, and recent criminal activities that directly impact this case. Stacy's smug expression faltered. Shelley Sharp's eyes narrowed. Objection. Shelley snapped. This is nothing but character assassination. The judge held up a hand. I'll hear the evidence, Counselor. Proceed, Ms. Chun. For the next hour, Ashley methodically laid out their case. Bank statements showing mysterious withdrawals. Phone records documenting years of deception. The damning footage from the fire station, catching Stacy and Carlton red-handed in their attempted frame-up. With each piece of evidence, Stacy seemed to shrink in her seat. Shelley Sharp's aggressive tactics fell flat in the face of Ashley's meticulous preparation. And finally, Your Honor, Ashley concluded, we have Mr. Barber's own testimony. Despite Mrs. Barber's betrayal and criminal actions, he seeks only a fair division of assets. He does not wish to leave her destitute, merely to protect what he has rightfully earned. The judge's penetrating gaze swept the courtroom, lingering on Stacy's now pale face. I've seen enough. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Barber. Mrs. Barber's claims are dismissed in their entirety. Mr. Barber will retain all assets in his name, including his pension. Mrs. Barber is entitled only to personal effects still in the marital home. The gavel's crack was like thunder in the stunned silence. Stacy's wail of outrage pierced the air. This isn't fair. He can't just. Mrs. Barber. The judge's voice cut through her protests. I suggest you leave quietly before I hold you in contempt. And Miss Sharp, I'll be referring this case to the Bar Association for review of your tactics. As Stacy was ushered out, still shrieking, Roderick allowed himself a small smile. Round one of the reckoning was complete. The school board meeting room hummed with tension. Angry parents packed shoulder to shoulder. At the front, Roderick sat calmly, a folder of documents on the table before him. Board President Margaret Holloway called for order, her voice strained. We're here to discuss the situation regarding Mrs. Stacy Barber's continued employment as a guidance counselor at Lincoln High School. A chorus of outraged voices rose. She's a criminal. How can we trust her with our children? Fire her immediately. Margaret raised her hands. Please, let's approach this rationally. Mrs. Barber is here to speak in her own defense. Stacy sauntered to the podium, a practiced smile plastered on her face. Her voice dripped with saccharine sweetness. I know there have been some misunderstandings, but I assure you, I am fully committed to the students of Lincoln High. My personal life has no bearing on my abilities as a counselor. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Roderick's hand tightened on the folder, but he held his peace. Not yet. Board member Tom Fitzgerald leaned forward. Mrs. Barber, how do you explain your relationship with a convicted felon? Your attempts to frame your ex-husband? These hardly seem like the actions of someone we can trust with impressionable teenagers. Stacy's smile never wavered. Those are private matters, blown out of proportion by a bitter ex-husband. I've done nothing wrong. The room erupted in angry shouts. Margaret banged her gavel. Order. Mr. Barber, you wish to address the board? Roderick stood, his presence commanding instant attention. Thank you, Madam President. I'll be brief. He opened the folder, withdrawing a stack of papers. What I have here are sworn statements from students at Lincoln High. Students who confided in Mrs. Barber about their own struggles with fidelity, with the law, with making ethical choices. Students who trusted her to guide them towards the right path. Stacy's practiced smile slipped. Roderick continued, his voice steady. These statements detail how Mrs. Barber counseled these students, how she encouraged them to lie, to cheat, to pursue their own selfish desires at the expense of others, how she used their confidences to manipulate them. The room fell deathly silent. I don't present these lightly, Roderick said, but as a member of this community, as someone who has sworn to protect and serve, I cannot in good conscience allow Mrs. Barber to continue in a position of trust and authority over our children. Stacy's composure cracked. You bastard, she shrieked. You have no right. Those brats came to me, whining about their pathetic little problems. I told them to grow up, to take what they wanted. That's the real world. The crowd recoiled in horror. Margaret's gavel thundered. Mrs. Barber, that is enough. But Stacy was beyond reason. You're all hypocrites, acting so high and mighty. I bet half of you are screwing around on your spouses too. Security, Margaret called. Remove Mrs. Barber immediately. As Stacy was dragged from the room, still hurling invectives, the board huddled in hurried conference. It took less than 5 minutes for Margaret to return to the microphone. In light of the evidence presented and Mrs. Barber's outburst, This board unanimously votes to terminate her employment, effective immediately. The room erupted in cheers. Roderick allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. Another nail in the coffin of Stacy's delusions. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fire station parking lot. Roderick emerged from the bay doors, conversation with his crew cut short by the sound of screeching tires. A battered Camaro skidded to a stop, Carlton A. Bear exploding from the driver's seat like a rabid dog. His eyes were wild, spittle flying from his lips as he charged across the asphalt. "You ruined everything. You son of a bitch." Roderick's colleagues tensed, ready to intervene, but he held up a hand. "I've got this." Carlton closed the distance, meaty fists swinging. But years of hauling hoses and climbing ladders had honed Roderick's reflexes to a razor's edge. He sidestepped the clumsy assault, using Carlton's momentum to send him stumbling. "You're making a mistake, Carlton," Roderick said, voice calm. "Walk away now, before you make things worse for yourself." But reason had no place in Carlton's rage-addled mind. He charged again, a bull to Roderick's matador. This time, Roderick didn't dodge. He met Carlton's rush head-on, years of firefighter training kicking in. In a fluid motion, Roderick trapped Carlton's arm, using the bigger man's weight against him. Carlton found himself face down on the pavement, arm twisted behind his back in a textbook hold. "Stay down," Roderick growled. "It's over." Carlton thrashed uselessly. "I'll kill you. You hear me? I'll fucking kill you." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Stacy's car screeched into the lot, her face a mask of fury as she took in the scene. "Let him go, you bastard." Roderick maintained his hold on Carlton, addressing them both. "You know, I almost feel sorry for you too. So caught up in your own selfishness, you can't see the hole you've dug for yourselves." Police cruisers pulled in, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. "But here's the thing," Roderick continued, his voice carrying across the lot. "While you were plotting your petty revenge, I was busy. Those assets you thought you'd get in the divorce, Stacy? The money you were counting on, Carlton?
It's gone.
Stacy's eyes widened in horror. "What are you talking about?" Roderick allowed himself a smile. "I donated it all. Every last penny to a charity that supports victims of domestic abuse and infidelity. Seems fitting, don't you think?" Carlton let out a howl of rage, renewing his struggles. Roderick calmly handed him off to the approaching officers. "You can't do that," Stacy shrieked. "It's my money too." "Not according to the courts," Roderick replied. "You made your choices, Stacy. These are the consequences." As Carlton was cuffed and shoved into a cruiser, Stacy's shoulders slumped in defeat. The reality of her situation finally seemed to sink in. Roderick turned away, done with them both. He was met by a wall of his colleagues, faces shining with admiration and support. "That was some fancy moves, Barber," Lieutenant Sanderson said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Didn't know you had it in you." Roderick allowed himself a genuine smile. "Neither did I, Mike. Neither did I." As the police cars pulled away, Stacy's wails fading into the distance, Roderick felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The storm had passed. He'd weathered it and come out stronger on the other side. His team surrounded him, a protective circle of brotherhood. Whatever came next, Roderick knew he wouldn't face it alone. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and possibility. Roderick Barber stood before a group of fresh-faced recruits, their eyes bright with anticipation and a touch of nervousness. "Being a firefighter isn't just about running into burning buildings," Roderick began, his voice carrying easily across the training yard. "It's about integrity. It's about standing tall when the world tries to knock you down." The recruits hung on his every word. In the months since the dust had settled on his personal drama, Roderick had become something of a legend in the department. Not for his battle with Stacy and Carlton, though those stories circulated in hushed whispers, but for his unwavering commitment to the job and his fellow firefighters. "You'll face challenges in this career," he continued. "Some will test your physical limits. Others will push you to your emotional breaking point. But remember this. Integrity is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets." As he spoke, Roderick's mind drifted back over the tumultuous journey that had led him here. The betrayal, the anger, the moments of doubt, they had all shaped him, forged him into something stronger than he'd been before. "When I joined the force, I thought I knew what resilience meant," Roderick said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Turns out, I had a lot to learn. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Your job is to stand your ground, no matter how hard the wind blows." The recruits nodded, soaking in his words. Roderick saw in their faces the same determination, the same desire to serve that had driven him all these years. "Remember," he concluded, "at the end of the day, it's not just about saving lives out there. It's about being someone worth saving, someone your team can rely on, no matter what. That's what being a firefighter really means." As the recruits filed out, Chief Wallace approached, a look of approval on his weathered face. "Damn fine speech, Barber. You've got a real knack for this mentoring business." Roderick shrugged, a hint of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "Just trying to pass on what I've learned, Chief." "Well, keep it up. These kids need role models like you." As the chief walked away, Roderick checked his watch. His heart quickened slightly. He had just enough time to shower and change before meeting Ashley for dinner. Their relationship had blossomed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. Ashley had seen him at his lowest, had stood by him through the storm, and now, as they explored this new chapter together, Roderick found himself looking forward to the future in a way he hadn't in years. Later, as they sat across from each other in a cozy Italian restaurant, Ashley's eyes sparkled in the candlelight. "So, how did the new recruits like Firefighter Barber's words of wisdom?" Roderick chuckled, taking a sip of wine. "They seemed impressed. Or terrified. Hard to tell sometimes." Ashley laughed, the sound warming him more than any fire ever could. "Well, you were pretty impressive. And maybe a little terrifying." As they talked and laughed, Roderick felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. The betrayal that had once threatened to break him had instead opened the door to a life more fulfilling than he could have imagined. He had true friends, a job he loved, and a woman who saw him for who he really was. The road had been hard, the battles fierce, but as he looked into Ashley's eyes, Roderick knew he wouldn't change a thing. For in the crucible of adversity, he had found his true strength. And with it, a future bright with promise and possibility.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
My wife cheated on me with a 15-year friend during my work trip. I confronted them, got my revenge. I'm Steve, and my wife's Kate. We've been married for more than 3 years. The first year was really happy, the second was good, and the third had some issues. It might seem silly or childish. I can't say I disagree, but I'm not sure if you would react differently. We were in the middle of an argument. We've had a lot of those lately, Kate and I, but this one was really bad. I don't even know what it was about, something small like the laundry or an unpaid bill. Kate has this habit of bringing up irrelevant complaints during arguments, things that have nothing to do with what we're fighting about. It could be stuff from years ago, like when I didn't pick up her sister from a party, or just random things that occur to her to hit me with. This was one of those times. "And you just never stop talking. Do you know that, Steve?" She said this in a harsh tone. "Nothing makes you happier than the sound of your own voice, even when we're, in bed." There was silence. Kate must have seen from my face that she went too far. I was hurt, so I just looked at her. I thought about saying I had no idea my talking during closeness bothered her. It's how I express my love and excitement. But then I decided not to say anything. Kate continued, saying my talking distracts her during closeness and turns her off. I was surprised. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? We've been married for over 3 years, and I thought she enjoyed my affectionate words. She talked less than I did in bed, but she always said a few words. After a long silence, I stood up and told Kate I'd try to only speak when it's important. Then I left the room. Update, I wasn't proud of my actions afterward. All I can say is I felt really hurt. The unexpected argument hit me hard. I thought if she wanted silence, then she would get silence. Our fights were getting worse. Despite still loving Kate, we found it harder and harder to be content with each other. There were fewer happy times and more tense moments, and arguments over small things. A major issue was my job as a sales rep for a plumbing supply company, requiring me to travel for about 3 weeks, 4 days a month. Kate didn't like me being away so much, but she knew this before we got married. She also wanted to start a family, which I resisted for another 2 years. I expected a promotion that would let me stop traveling. I just didn't want to have a baby until I could be home all the time. So those were the big issues. Lately, even tiny things seemed to trigger fights. The reservoir of love and goodwill seemed almost empty, and I didn't know why. One thing Kate said kept bothering me, that my talking during closeness was the opposite of what turned her on. Did that mean she was enjoying closeness with someone else? Someone who didn't talk, it seemed far, fetched until I thought about it more? During my last trip, about 10 days. Earlier, I couldn't reach her on the phone twice. The second time, she had her cell phone switched off when she should have been back from work. The next day, she said she went for a beer with friends, which seemed reasonable, except I called the house around 10:30 and she was still out. Also, in the past month, 3 times I answered the phone and the person hung up. Not a big deal, but it rarely happened before, so I got more suspicious and took action. For the next 2 weeks, Kate probably thought she was living with a mute. No small talk, no idle conversation, no words unless absolutely necessary. Instead of saying, "Could you pass the salt, honey?" I got up and got it myself. In response to, "What's the weather going to be like today?" I passed her the weather page of the newspaper. If she asked me to make dinner that night, all she got was, "Okay." When she left for work and said, "Goodbye, honey," I gave her a smile and a wave. It became a game to see how few words I could say to her in a day. Kate knew I was angry and hurt, and she knew why. At first, she didn't seem to care much, but after that, she started trying to make up. She didn't exactly apologize, that was rare in our house, but she became much more affectionate. Kisses greeted me in bed in the morning, on the way out for work, and at bedtime. Sometimes she leaned over to give me a hug while I was reading the paper over coffee in the morning, or rubbed my shoulders while we were watching TV. It was a funny thing, even as my anger gradually calmed down and nobody can stay white hot angry over days, I kept saying as little as possible. Before speaking, I'd ask myself if I really needed to say it, and usually the answer was no. I was listening more, observing more, and keeping my thoughts to myself. About 10 days after the argument, Kate suggested we make love. Whether she wanted to or it was part of making up, I couldn't tell. After dinner, during which she told me some stories about work and I spoke no more than 6 words, she stood up and took me by the hand, urging me to leave the dishes for later. With a big, warm smile, she conveyed that there was something else she needed at that moment. As she led me back to the bedroom, I wondered if the distance between us had grown because of my silence, or if I was silent because we had already drifted so far apart. During the entire encounter, I hadn't uttered a word. As we coupled smoothly, easily, and familiarly, I remained completely silent, feeling a sense of unnatural coldness and distance. I wasn't even sure if it was what Kate truly wanted, but after that argument, I had no intention of saying a word. After we finished, I rolled off her, and she snuggled into me, emitting a happy, Without any verbal communication, we relaxed together for a while, still without exchanging any words. I couldn't discern what the experience had been like for her. For me, it felt cold and empty, and whether that was due to the silence or the growing distance between us remained uncertain. Update: after a few more days of minimal conversation, Kate became upset with me. One night during dinner, she expressed frustration, questioning my silence and whether I had anything to say. After a moment of thought, I responded that I thought this was what she wanted. She clarified, explaining that she desired a husband who communicates and shares feelings, not someone resembling a mannequin from a department store. Privately, I chuckled, thinking, "Good one, Kate." Last week she had complained about me talking too much, so I was making an effort to rectify that. Kate accused me of taking the silent treatment too far, labeling it the Silent Sam routine. I looked at her for a moment before speaking. Some of my confusion was intended to annoy her, and partly, I was genuinely puzzled. I honestly didn't know what she wanted. First, I talked too much, then, too little. "How am I supposed to know what to do now?" She glared at me, clearly very angry, insisting that I stop and be the man she married. I regretted my earlier words, stating that she doesn't talk too much. We were arguing. I was upset, and I just threw that at her. After a pause, I added, "All right, Kate, but I have to admit, your words got me thinking that maybe I do talk too much, or without thinking first about whether I really have anything to say." After a moment, I smiled at her, saying, "In a way, all this has been helpful." She smiled back warmly, her anger seemingly gone, and for a moment I felt the closeness between us that had been missing. I then brought up the topic of making love, genuinely seeking to understand. I asked if she meant what she said about not talking during closeness. Rather than answering my question, Kate left the table. For the rest of the evening, she gave me the cold shoulder, which didn't seem fair despite my honest attempt to understand her feelings. The next morning brought a more hopeful atmosphere. Kate had stepped back from her initial attack, expressing a desire for communication. Unfortunately, her focus remained on the end of the conversation, evident in her glares and tight-lipped phrases at breakfast. We endured a few more days of minimal communication, ironic this time, as she was giving me the silent treatment. After 3 to 4 days, Kate's mood drastically changed again. She came home from work looking very upset and headed straight for the shower. Over dinner, she was distracted, saying little and frequently losing track of my conversation. This wasn't the angry, silent treatment anymore. She was clearly preoccupied with something. But when I asked her if something was wrong, and I asked several times, she only mentioned a problem at work. I noticed, though, that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. Unsure of what was bothering her, I decided to wait and see. The next day, I received a call at work. Ernie Matazzo confirmed my suspicions about Kate having an affair. I thanked him, left work, and went home. Looking at the photos, the only surprise was the guy, Adam, who hadn't been my best man but was one of my groomsmen. He'd always admired Kate, and I'd never considered him a threat. I felt cold and empty, like the last time Kate and I were in bed together. I sat for a long time, contemplating everything, and pulled out the photos, finding them unchanged from the first time I put them away. Update: when Kate arrived home, she found me seated on the couch, seemingly idle. I remained quiet as she greeted me, my expression crafted to appear neutral rather than angry. Her inquiry about my unusual behavior grew more pointed, a blend of concern and annoyance evident in her edgier tone as she probed further, sensing that something was amiss. I maintained my silence. Frustration welled within her as she pressed for an explanation, insinuating a return to the silent treatment of the past. In response, I sat up, cutting through the tension with a direct question. I asked her how long she had been dating him. Kate, taken aback, recoiled in shock and retreated a step. Perplexed, she took a seat across from me, seeking to understand my accusation. Her attempts to read my expression proved futile. The atmosphere thickened as she continued to deny any involvement with someone else, clasping her hands tightly in her lap as she implored me to reveal the source of my accusations. Her plea, laden with frustration, suggested that I harbored a guilty conscience. Unyielding, I presented an envelope containing a photograph, a damning image of Kate on Adam's bed. She looked at it briefly, dropped it in surprise, and recoiled as though it were a threat. Blushing, she retreated into her chair, avoiding eye contact. In the face of my persistent silence, she decided to change the subject, heading for the bedroom. However, I intercepted her with the incriminating photo. She hesitated, and unable to escape my unrelenting gaze, she finally met my eyes with a silent plea. "How long?" I reiterated. Her response was a withdrawal into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her as she shook her head. The silence lingered, and she eventually appealed to me, requesting that I spare her from discussing the matter. Declaring my decision to leave, I moved toward the bedroom to pack. In a desperate plea, she implored me to wait, promising to disclose everything. Relenting, I resumed my seat, observing her as she struggled to maintain eye contact. Unable to endure the silence, she confessed, apologizing and expressing remorse as she pleaded with me not to leave. I remained seated, meeting her gaze with an unwavering expression. She averted her eyes, and after a moment, she mustered the courage to look back at me, tearfully admitting that Adam had told her I was also involved. Surprised, I refrained from questioning her and gestured for her to continue. Kate explained that a month earlier she had encountered Adam at the supermarket. He, being charming and friendly, had offered her companionship in my absence, arriving at our house with pizza and wine. They spent a casual evening together, misled by Adam's claim that I too was engaged in similar actions. Towards the end, he started acting worried and concerned. When Kate questioned him about it, he claimed I had been unfaithful. He did an impressive job at acting, appearing reluctant, with his head hanging, avoiding an eye contact with me. According to him, you and he had a conversation a couple of weeks earlier where you confessed about a girl you were involved with during your trips. He provided convincing details about her appearance, where you met, and how great you said she was in bed. I started crying, and Adam consoled me, expressing admiration for my beauty and how he couldn't fathom how any man could cheat on me. A little while later, we ended up in bed together, and I only found out yesterday that the entire story was false. I waited, expressionless. She continued, her expression now more somber than before. "I found myself in his apartment," she said. "After he had this smug demeanor. He brought up the notion that if it weren't for your involvement with Julia, we wouldn't have realized how well we connect." I raised the issue of inconsistency, reminding him that during our initial conversation about your supposed lover, he had mentioned the name Joanne. He couldn't recall any of the details, like her appearance or how you met. Frustrated, I screamed at him to tell me the truth. "Did you really cheat on me?" He laughed, admitting it was just a story to get me into bed. Kate's face turned red with anger. I got up, threw on my clothes, and berated him, calling him out for making a fool of me, she continued. He just lay there, smiling, unapologetic and unremorseful. I couldn't believe what I had done. She trailed off, her voice choked with emotion, and then she broke down, sobbing with her face in her hands, her body heaving. The urge to comfort Kate was overshadowed by a cold emptiness. Was she truly that naive, or had our love deteriorated to the point where she was willing to believe even the most absurd stories? And then there was my rage at Adam, a friend of 15 years. I sat in silence while Kate sobbed. After about 5 minutes, I stood up. Kate watched me fearfully as I took her cell phone from her purse, put it in my pocket, and went to the bedroom and kitchen, unplugging the phones and putting them in a bag under my arm. Before departing, I glanced back at Kate and conveyed that I would return. I instructed her not to leave and cautioned against engaging in conversations with anyone. Despite my quiet tone, she appeared terrified and affirmed my instructions with a nod. Update: on the way to Adam S. I focused on controlling my breath to appear calm and friendly. When Adam opened his door, he seemed surprised and nervous. Without hesitation, I invited him for a couple of beers and suggested watching the Phillies, saying Kate was at a meeting. Though he observed me carefully, he put on a friendly demeanor and agreed to my proposal. We sat in his living room, chatting amiably while the game played in the background. Keeping the conversation light, I noticed Adam gradually relaxing, thinking it was a casual visit. However, I remained uncertain about the situation. It took more than an hour to steer the conversation toward relationships. I inquired about the ladies he was dating, making him momentarily nervous, but my reassuring smile prompted him to share details about a girl from work he'd been seeing casually. I mentioned a talkative college girlfriend, and Adam took the bait, agreeing that actions speak louder than words during intimate moments. Laughing, he boasted about revealing the desires of many girls, expressing satisfaction. Leaning in, I asked about Kate's preferences, catching him off guard. After a moment of shock, he tried to laugh it off, but I kept pressing him with a smile. He finally agreed to be quiet, looking at me fearfully. Expressing my disbelief, I confronted him about betraying our friendship and deceiving my wife to have an affair with her. Downplaying it, he claimed it wasn't a big deal, arguing, she's just a woman. He trailed off uncertainly, looking at my face. Staring at him in disbelief, I questioned how I had ever been friends with him. Asserting that things were better out in the open, I insisted he tell me everything about his deceitful game with Kate. Having already talked to her, I warned that lying wouldn't work. Wide-eyed and genuinely afraid, Adam nodded at me, signaling his readiness to talk. He recounted the story, aligning closely with what Kate had said. He had always found her attractive and had been flirting with her for several months whenever he encountered her. He was single. One week he bumped into her at the supermarket and saw his chance. Initially thinking he could seduce her, he fabricated a story about my affair. When it became apparent she wouldn't cheat on me, he deliberately angered her and made her feel sorry for herself, making it easier to get her into bed. They met about 5 more times, always at his place. The first encounter was great because she was upset about my alleged affair, she cried. However, the subsequent times were fantastic, exactly as he described. When he noticed my disapproval, he abruptly stopped talking. I had cut his hair almost to the roots by then, finding satisfaction in picturing him hiding his head with hats for weeks. Coldly, I inquired if it was over. After a brief hesitation, he admitted it was and shared that she found out about the fabricated story. Unable to recall the name of the supposed girl I was dating, she got angry and left. I was ready to leave, feeling empty. Although I could have pressed for more details, I decided against it. I informed Adam that our friendship was over, warning against retaliation. We agreed not to involve the police. He nodded, looking more humiliated than angry, and requested to be released. Smiling, I assured him I'd leave the apartment door open, allowing him to free himself in about an hour. I walked away without turning back. Update: upon my return, Kate was seated on the couch in her bathrobe, her wet hair indicating recent distress. As I moved around the apartment, fixing the phones, she remained visibly scared and unhappy. Taking a seat across from her, we exchanged glances, but I maintained my silence. Eventually, she inquired about my actions, to which I explained the conversation with Adam, assuring her that I hadn't. Resorted to violence and expressing doubt about hearing from him anytime soon. Despite acknowledging that she almost wished I had confronted him physically, she recognized the potential consequences. Troubled, she sought to move past the situation, admitting her foolishness and asking for forgiveness. I looked at her for a prolonged moment before responding, our pattern of saying very little to each other becoming a habit. I dawned to know, I finally replied, and it was an honest admission. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to cry. The following morning, Kate entered the kitchen, expressing delight at the breakfast and coffee set on the table. Her joy faded abruptly upon noticing the 2 large suitcases near the door. Distraught, she questioned my departure, pleading with me not to leave. Instead of leaving without a word, I served her a cup of coffee and persuaded her to sit across from me. "Kate, it's over," I declared. I admitted uncertainty about what had transpired or why, but emphasized that our relationship had deteriorated. Despite acknowledging our initial compatibility, I highlighted a year of impatience, snappiness, and constant fighting. I pointed out that her choice to believe Adam's dubious story about my infidelity and her subsequent actions indicated a departure from the woman I had married. I suggested she must have been on the verge of straying for our relationship to reach this point. Pausing, I waited for her response, but she cried silently, holding her face in her hands. When I ceased speaking, she looked up at me pleadingly. I offered her an opportunity to speak, to prove me wrong, to outline a path to revive our love. Regrettably, she remained silent, merely gazing at me and crying. I headed to the door, bidding her farewell as I picked up my suitcases and departed. My wife cheated on me, and it devastated my life, but I found a new path and got the best revenge. I stepped outside, holding a leash, ready to take my dog for a walk and enjoy a short run. As I observed my neighbors starting their cars and heading to work, I let out a deep sigh, realizing I had no office or workplace to rush to anymore. Following my business's bankruptcy, I was stuck with a huge pile of debt, and I'd be spending another day at home trying to revive my once thriving business, which had met with nothing but failure. The weight of these setbacks left me feeling lost in a world that continued moving forward without me. I noticed my neighbor, James, walking over from his well-maintained driveway. James ran a successful car import business and often had different luxury cars parked outside his house. Today was no exception, and James walked confidently with a big grin. James greeted me cheerfully, almost too cheerful. I responded with a forced smile, even though I noticed his grin seemed to grow wider. I remarked on another day of relaxation for him, though his comment stung. I calmly mentioned that every day brings its own challenges. James just chuckled and said he had cars to import, then strolled away. I watched him go, reminding myself not to let his insensitive remarks affect me. I knew some people couldn't resist the urge to gloat. Returning home used to bring me great comfort, but now it felt like stepping into a storm, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because of someone who lived there, my wife, Nicole. Nicole, who worked as an insurance agent, had grown distant and cold since my financial troubles began. The difference was stark. Gone were the days when she would excitedly call me to come home early for a romantic dinner or snuggle on the couch for a movie. Our conversations, once warm and affectionate, had become brief and mechanical. The home that had once been a sanctuary of love now felt like a reminder of what we had lost. I attempted to bridge the growing gap between us by mentioning the times when Nicole used to check on me during the day. Nicole responded curtly, without looking up from her papers, indicating that things change. One evening, after returning from work, I gathered the courage to approach Nicole, driven by my longing to rekindle the closeness we had once shared. I softly brought up our first anniversary, recalling the candlelight dinner on the terrace and our dance under the stars. Nicole looked up from her laptop with an unreadable expression and inquired about the purpose of my remarks. "I confess," I said, I miss us. I miss how things used to be." She audibly sighed, closed her laptop, and explained that she didn't have time for this at the moment, as she was swamped with work. She emphasized that being at home didn't grant her the luxury to sit around and reminisce. I felt a sharp sense of rejection and expressed my desire to spend time together as we used to. Nicole's eyes hardened as she mentioned the times had changed, highlighting her responsibilities while I pursued my activities. She indicated that she didn't have time for sweet talk and suggested that we could discuss things when she wasn't buried with work. I nodded, feeling the weight of the distance between us. "All right, Nicole, whenever you're ready." As I walked away, the cold silence of our home felt more pronounced than ever. While walking through the park with my dog, a newfound optimism began to well up within me. Despite the failure of my business, I realized it was just one obstacle in the grand scheme of life. I whispered to myself, patting my dog, "It's just another challenge. I can and will rise again." Upon returning home from the dog walk, I noticed Nicole at the dressing table, gracefully applying lipstick and makeup. Her reflection caught my eyes, evoking memories of the early days of our love. I approached her with a gentle smile and complimented her beauty. Nicole didn't even glance at me. She continued applying her makeup. A moment later, when she was finished, she looked at her own reflection and smiled, remarking, "I am beautiful." In an effort to bridge the gap between us, I casually inquired about her work schedule for the evening. She paused, eyeing me curiously. "Around 7, I think. Why?" I winked and replied, "Oh, no reason, just thought I'd ask." In my heart, I planned a surprise. Tonight, I would prepare a home-cooked dinner, complete with her favorite wine. It was a small gesture, but perhaps it could mark the beginning of healing our bond and regaining her attention. After all, mending our relationship might just be the motivation I needed to rebuild my career. Was this response better or worse? I spent the day refreshing our home, with upbeat music playing in the background. I wanted the atmosphere to radiate warmth and welcome for Nicole's return. With every clean surface, washed dish, and empty trash, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. After making our home shine, I headed to the grocery store to gather ingredients for the evening's dinner. As an afterthought, I decided to visit the wine store to get Nicole's favorite wine. Upon entering, the familiar doorbell chime greeted me, and Pam, the saleswoman, recognized me with excitement. Pam greeted me, saying it had been a while and asking how I'd been. I gave a half smile and replied that I had had better days but was getting by. I inquired if they had a bottle of the rose wine, to which Pam playfully raised her eyebrows and teased about planning a romantic evening at home. I chuckled, attempting to sound nonchalant, and confirmed that it was something like that. I mentioned that Nicole had been there about an hour ago and had picked up a bottle of the same wine. Pam seemed to realize she might have said too much, and she stammered, suggesting that maybe Nicole was planning her own surprise. Clearing her throat, she efficiently wrapped the bottle for me, hoping to change the subject. As I headed home, my hopeful mood was replaced by a swirl of thoughts. I contemplated the possibilities. Could Nicole also be preparing a surprise for me? But why would she buy the wine in the afternoon? I gripped the steering wheel, a mix of anticipation and anxiety taking hold. I decided not to jump to conclusions. One thing was certain, I'd find out soon. Pulling into my driveway, I took a deep breath to calm my racing thoughts and set to work. The aroma of the dinner I'd prepared filled the house, offering a temporary distraction from my swirling thoughts. I glanced at the clock, 7:45. Nicole was usually punctual. Maybe her work held her up, I tried to reassure myself, but a nagging feeling lingered. Sitting in our dimly lit dining room, the table set for two, I occasionally checked my phone, hoping for a call or a message from Nicole. The house remained quiet, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Each passing moment heightened the mystery of Nicole's plans. Finally, around 8:30, my phone rang, and I recognized Nicole's ringtone. I answered quickly. "Hey?" Nicole's voice came through, rushed and slightly breathless. "Hey, babe, where are you?" I asked, masking my concern. "I'm so sorry, Robert," she replied hurriedly. An unexpected business trip came up and I couldn't turn it down. My boss insisted. I tried to digest the news. "Oh, okay, but can't you leave in the morning or something?" "I'm actually already on my way there." She sighed and added, "It's a significant opportunity, could open some doors for me." I took a deep breath. I wanted to be understanding, especially considering my recent setbacks. "I understand. I wish you had told me sooner, though." I know, Nicole replied, the rush in her voice evident. "Everything happened so fast. I really have to go, Robert." I looked at the beautifully set table and the dinner I'd prepared. "All right, take care, Nicole. Call me when you can." Nicole's voice softened. "Okay, I will. I'll be back soon. Bye. And by the way, I don't know how long it's going to last, maybe like 2 weeks or so." As the call ended, I sank into a chair, my shoulders slumping under the weight of the evening's turn of events. I struggled to piece together the puzzle of my thoughts. The unexpected business trip seemed plausible, but the earlier wine purchase kept bothering me. Maybe she simply wanted to unwind during her trip and didn't mention it. I tried to rationalize, attempting to push aside the cloud of doubt forming in my mind. I took a deep breath, urging myself to focus on the present. Right in front of me was a delicious meal, and I was reluctant to let it go to waste. With renewed determination, I served myself some food and moved to the living room. The soft glow of the TV filled the room as I switched it on. The familiar sounds of a game in progress greeted me. I decided to immerse myself in it, temporarily pushing aside my concerns, or sometimes a little. Distraction was all I needed to find clarity. I relaxed on the couch, thoroughly enjoying the game's excitement. An occasional chuckle escaped my lips, indicating my genuine amusement. When my glass ran dry, I strolled to the kitchen for a refill. The evening's anxieties began to fade, replaced by a warmer, lighter feeling. As I passed the study, an unexpected light caught my eye. The computer screen was illuminated, something that typically happened when notifications came in or if it was disturbed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped into the study, switching on the overhead light. I mused to myself that maybe someone had left the computer on after having one too many drinks, but just as I was about to leave, another noise from the computer halted me in my tracks. A small pop-up in the screen's lower corner grabbed my attention, displaying the message. "Photos successfully synced." With raised eyebrows, I approached the computer and clicked on the notification. The screen showed the loading icon for a moment before revealing a list of files, all timestamped from just hours ago. Tentatively, I opened one of the files, and the image started loading from top to bottom, gradually revealing a familiar face. As the image continued to load, Nicole's smiling face appeared, and her surroundings became clearer. By the time the image fully rendered, my heart sank. There she was, my wife, playfully taking a selfie while sitting on her boss's lap. The realization weighed heavily on me, and I slumped into a nearby chair, holding my head in my hands. All the doubts and suspicions that I had pushed aside came rushing back, now confirmed by the undeniable truth on the screen. The room seemed to close in on me as I stared at the image, the playful glint in Nicole's eyes, the familiarity with which she leaned into her boss. It all painted a story that I didn't want to believe. The wine I had consumed churned uneasily in my stomach. I returned to the list of files, clicking on another one. A sequence of photos revealed Nicole and her boss at a fancy bar. In some pictures, they were laughing and toasting with their glasses. In others, they were engaged in deep conversation, their faces close together. With each image, the reality of the situation became more evident. The evening's attempts to rekindle our relationship, the dinner I had prepared with care, it all seemed to taunt me now. A confusing mix of anger, pain, and betrayal flooded me, and most of all, I felt an overpowering sense of loss. I got up and returned to the living room, no longer interested in the wine I held. I was now looking for something stronger. With a light drizzle outside, I put on my coat and headed out slowly. I made my way to the liquor store. As I walked, my heart ached with pain. I could feel myself shattering into numerous pieces. Memories of the joyful times I shared with Nicole replayed in my mind, but now they were tinged with sadness. The question, why, echoed repeatedly. Why did Nicole grow distant? Was it because I had failed as a provider? I remembered the times when my business was thriving, when we both had big dreams. I had once enthusiastically promised Nicole the latest Mercedes, a symbol of success and luxury. But I never followed through on that promise. Could that unkempt promise be a part of why she distanced herself, or was it something more? It was hard to pinpoint one reason. Perhaps it was a combination of many small things, overlooked moments, and unspoken emotions. All I knew for certain was that our relationship had changed, leaving me with a profound sense of loss and confusion. I entered the store, rainwater dripping from my face and soaking my coat. Pam, upon recognizing me, noticed the fading smile on my face and paused for a moment, searching for the right words. "Hey, Robert," she began gently. "Having a tough day?" My voice was low, almost a whisper. "Whiskey, please." Pam, perceptive as always, sensed that something was amiss. "Are you sure about that? You know, if you need someone to talk to." But I simply shook my head, interrupting her. "Just the whiskey, thanks." I took the bottle, offered a brief wary smile, and left the store. I didn't wait until I got home to open the whiskey. After a few swallows, the world began to spin. The drink heightened my emotions, breaking down my usual defenses. Stumbling a bit, I began speaking louder to strangers passing by. "Hey there," I slurred, pointing at no one in particular. "Do you know my wife? She's off somewhere, having the time of her life with her boss, and here I am, celebrating." I laughed bitterly, my words dripping with sarcasm. "Yep, a one-man party, that's me." As time passed, my speech became increasingly incoherent. I began to sing fragments of a song that had played in my home earlier, the same song meant to accompany a romantic dinner for two. My voice wavered, sometimes staying on key, other times going entirely off tune. The sadness in my rendition was palpable, the melody mirroring my broken heart. Stumbling along the sidewalk, I realized I had lost my whiskey bottle. Thinking I had finished it, I decided to return to the store for another. As I swayed and muttered to myself, I reached into my pocket for money, but it was nowhere to be found. It was then that I noticed an older man nearby, watching me with a mix of concern and curiosity. I raised my voice and my words slurred together as I confronted the old man, asking if he had something to say. The elderly man, wearing glasses and carrying a worn-out backpack, appeared surprised by my aggression at first. However, my tone quickly shifted from confrontational to desperate. I apologized to him, my voice breaking, and explained that I really needed a drink right now. I asked if he could spare $120. The old man sighed and reached into his pockets, pulling out a few crumpled dollar bills from his shirt pocket. He told me it was all he had and extended the money. To me, still steady on my feet, I accepted the money and mumbled my thanks. Then I suggested that he join me for a drink, but the old man gently declined, expressing concern that I had already had enough. I was about to respond defiantly when my stomach turned, and I vomited onto the pavement. The mist had soaked everything around, and the cold was settling in. Wet and disoriented, I leaned against a brick wall with my eyes closed, trying to catch my breath. The old man observed with a furrowed brow, expressing worry. He prodded gently, asking if I lived nearby. In my hardly coherent state, I simply murmured that I wanted to sleep. Surveying the nearly deserted street, with the dim light from a nearby lamppost casting long shadows on the wet pavement, the old man expressed concern that it wasn't a suitable place to sleep, especially in such weather conditions. He mustered his strength and helped me to my feet, taking most of my weight. Encouraging me, the old man led me toward a nearby bridge. Below the bridge, hidden from the rain and prying eyes, was a small makeshift shelter that served as the old man's temporary home. It was constructed from discarded materials and tarps, offering limited comfort, but at least it was dry and relatively warm. I stirred awake, the soft chirping of morning birds filling my ears. My surroundings seemed unfamiliar, a murky haze blurring my vision. My skull throbbed with pain from the previous night's excesses. I winced as I tried to make sense of where I was. The dim light revealed a simple wooden shelter. With a groan, I pushed back the curtain and stepped outside, attempting to orient myself. Next to a gentle river, an elderly man sat calmly, casting his fishing line. His posture remained relaxed, and his hands displayed steadiness despite the evident marks of time on his skin. Cautiously approaching the man, I greeted him with a questioning look. He responded with a knowing smile and remarked that it took me a while to wake up and that we had a bit too much fun the previous night. Momentarily taken aback by the man's warmth, I stammered, expressing my lack of memory regarding how I ended up there. The man, named Jim Hughes, chuckled and explained that I had consumed too much alcohol the night before, leading to me passing out on the pavement. He mentioned that it didn't feel right to leave me there, so he brought me to this place. My cheeks reddened with embarrassment, and I thanked Jim while expressing my hope that I hadn't caused any trouble. Jim leaned back, and the sun reflected off his aged eyes as he admitted that I had been a bit loud, particularly in my shouts about my wife. Feeling the weight of the previous night's events, I apologized and explained that I'd been going through a tough time lately. Jim's gaze softened, and he offered comforting words, mentioning that he had been in a similar situation, experiencing grief and feeling lost. He shared some wisdom, stating that pain has its own way of healing and that time can help. Jim suggested having breakfast for the moment. Without hesitation, I blurted out a request for something to drink, citing the splitting headache I was experiencing. Jim chuckled, showing he'd already anticipated this, and soon the delightful aroma of simmering fish soup filled the air. I watched as Jim skillfully prepared the meal, and I couldn't help but express how heavenly it smelled. Jim replied with a wink, attributing it to an old family recipe, perfect for mornings like these. As we enjoyed the warmth and flavor of the fish soup under the open sky, Jim took a moment to offer me some advice. I sighed and expressed my understanding of the need to avoid letting alcohol control one's life. Jim looked at me, his gaze pausing for a moment, and shared his perspective, mentioning that life is complex, and that sometimes it's best to let go and move on, particularly if someone has wronged you. I sensed a touch of sadness in his eyes but refrained from delving further into the subject. Instead, I thanked Jim for everything and mentioned my intention to head home. As I prepared to leave, I noticed some intricately carved wooden figures and objects outside the shack. Impressed, I asked if Jim had made them. Jim's eyes sparkled as he confirmed that he had crafted them, explaining that they were a piece of his past life that he still held on to and that woodworking brought him peace. I expressed my admiration, complimenting his talent. A smile blossomed on my face as I continued my journey home, hinting at newfound hope and a fresh start. Upon arriving home, I rushed to my computer and became determined to reach out to local furniture stores in the following days, pitching my ideas with enthusiasm. 1 week later, filled with hope and determination, I retraced my steps to Jim's riverside shack. I expected to find the elderly man there, but only Jim's backpack and jacket lay near the dwelling, as if he had just stepped away. Confusion clouded my thoughts. Where could Jim be? I scanned the surroundings, but the old man was nowhere in sight. Maybe he's out fishing or gathering wood, I thought, considering coming back the next day. As I started my journey back, a small, sharp stone found its way into my shoe. Each step grew increasingly uncomfortable, like an incessant itch I couldn't scratch. I let out a sigh of irritation and found a flat spot to sit down, eager to remove the annoying intruder. However, as I lifted my shoe, my eyes darted past it to a lone figure standing perilously close to the edge of the bridge in the distance. Panic gripped me. The scene looked all too familiar. Without a second thought, I quickly put my shoe back on, not even bothering to tie the laces. I shouted with desperation as I saw the person too close to the edge of the bridge, fearing the worst. I hoped that with each rapid step I could reach them in time, praying they would hear me and step back to safety. My feet thudded against the wooden planks of the bridge, and as I got closer, Jim's figure became clearer. Initially relieved to find my friend, my smile disappeared when I noticed a coiled rope on the ground next to Jim, replacing my relief with gut-wrenching fear. Jim's eyes, filled with pain and unshed tears, met mine, conveying the despair that words couldn't express. Without hesitation, I approached Jim with slow and deliberate movements, careful not to startle him. I reached out and put an arm securely around his shoulders. We stood there together, two souls on that bridge, sharing a moment of raw vulnerability. I tightened my grip, feeling Jim's body tremble as his tears finally flowed. I pulled him into a tight embrace, the weight of the moment pressing down on us both. "It's okay," I murmured softly into Jim's ear, my voice steady and reassuring. "I'm here. We'll face this together." Sitting side by side on the bridge, Jim slowly began to share his story with me, unraveling the threads of his life step by step. He began by mentioning his service to the country and his job at a food processing plant, emphasizing that it may not have been glamorous, but it was honest labor. Jim's voice carried a weary tone as he recounted his journey, mentioning that he had secured a small apartment and had done everything he could to provide for his daughter, who meant the world to him. The weight of his memories was palpable as he rubbed his forehead. He continued, explaining that he lost his job when the plant downsized and missed a rent payment, leading to his eviction just a week later. Jim expressed how he had felt like he had nothing and no safety net, with pain etched in his eyes. Jim continued his story, describing how it had felt like every door was closing on him. He mentioned returning to his hometown with the hope of better luck but faced difficulties due to his lack of a permanent address. Even job interviews ended in rejection because of his history of job loss. Jim looked down and fidgeted with his hands, conveying his anguish as he recounted how he was picked up for sleeping in places he shouldn't have been and fell seriously ill. He shared the scarcity of assistance and how he eventually found refuge in a friend's van, which was temporary. He mentioned stumbling upon the shack by the bridge, which had become his makeshift home. He let out a heavy sigh, expressing that the most painful part had been knowing his daughter was out there, thinking her father had abandoned her. Jim had been deeply despondent, feeling lost and without any hope for a brighter future. He had reached the bridge in a state of despair. My heart unexpectedly went out to Jim, this elderly man with his gentle demeanor and genuine smile. He stirred a protective instinct within me. As we walked back to the shack together, I spoke with genuine warmth, telling Jim that life had thrown some hard punches his way, but he was not alone in this battle anymore. Jim's eyes glistened with a mix of gratitude and astonishment. My mind raced with possibilities. I had a vision, and Jim possessed the skills. So I proposed to Jim the idea of partnering with me in starting a small furniture business, possibly beginning with crafting cradles. Jim looked taken aback by the unexpected proposal, but slowly a glimmer of hope began to shine in his eyes, a light that had been missing for a long time. He asked hesitantly if I would trust him with that endeavor, to which I replied confidently that I wouldn't have offered if I didn't. Over the following 2 weeks, the garage at my house echoed with the sounds of sawing, hammering, and laughter as we skillfully crafted exquisite wooden cradles. Each piece carried a story of hope and fresh beginnings. Jim became more than just a guest in my home. We shared meals, stories, and dreams, becoming like family with each passing day. I loaded the beautifully crafted wooden cradles into my truck and headed to the local furniture stores. The cradles immediately caught the attention of store owners with their intricate designs and expert craftsmanship. When one store owner inquired about the craftsman, I proudly told them about my friend Jim, emphasizing his remarkable talent. It didn't take long for the cradles to gain popularity. Customers appreciated their uniqueness and the exceptional craftsmanship that went into each piece. Word spread, and soon more and more stores were reaching out to me and Jim with orders. One day, my smartphone displayed my wife Nicole's name, filling me with anticipation and memories. In a brief conversation, Nicole mentioned a delay and the possibility of an extended trip abroad. When I inquired about what was going on, there was a moment of silence, followed by Nicole clearing her throat. She then explained her urgent need for a loan. Hesitating due to our history and the abruptness of her request, I eventually conveyed my inability. "Nicole, I'm sorry, but I can't do that right now." Her irritation was audible, and she sighed and responded sharply with a "Fine, forget it," before abruptly ending the call. Jim and my collaboration had taken off, and the demand for our finely crafted cradles was on the rise. Our small workspace was quickly becoming inadequate to handle the expanding business. As time passed, it became evident that we needed more space to accommodate our growing enterprise. I recalled a conversation with my friend Mark, who mentioned owning an old barn just outside of town. It was spacious, sturdy, and had been vacant for years. The transition to the barn went smoothly, and we hired a couple of eager local workers who were enthusiastic about learning the craft and becoming part of our growing success. I began to oversee operations more frequently from my home office. One evening, after a long day at the barn, Jim returned home to a pleasant surprise. Upon entering the house, he found me bustling around in the kitchen, which was an unusual sight. Typically, we would share a simple dinner with the rest of the crew back at the barn before calling it a day. However, this evening was different. The table was neatly set, and a delicious aroma filled the air. Seeing Jim standing there, somewhat perplexed, I motioned for him to take a seat at the table. "Please, sit down, Jim. Dinner will be ready shortly," I said with a friendly smile. Jim, though confused, complied and took a seat, observing me as I moved about the kitchen with determination. Eventually, I joined him at the table, removing my apron. My face lit up with a wide grin, piquing Jim's curiosity. "I hope you won't be upset, Jim," I began, my eyes gleaming with an indescribable emotion. Before Jim could inquire further, the doorbell rang. I quickly answered it, and a moment later a young girl hesitantly entered the room, her eyes filled with curiosity as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. A woman followed closely behind. Jim's face shifted from pale to flushed with emotion as he recognized his daughter, Mindy. He rose from his seat, stumbling slightly as he rushed towards her. They embraced tightly, their emotions needing no words to convey their feelings. Behind them, I stood with the young girl, Kristen, smiling warmly at the heartwarming reunion. Mindy's voice quivered as she spoke amidst tears, expressing, "I thought I'd never see you again, Dad." Jim choked out with a trembling voice, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I should have reached out." In a soft tone, Mindy said, "You should have, Dad, but it's okay now," as she stroked her father's hair. Jim nodded, clinging to his daughter as if she would vanish if he let go. He then looked at Kristen and then at Mindy, slightly confused. Mindy laughed and informed him, "That's Kristen." Jim gazed at his granddaughter, a lovely little girl he had only seen as an infant in pictures. I clapped my hands gently, drawing their attention, and informed them, "Well, everyone, dinner is ready. Please, come to the table." As they gathered around the table, Mindy shared her struggles of the past month. Her obsession with finding her father had strained her relationship with her husband, ultimately leading to their separation. It had been a challenging journey, but at that moment, with her father by her side and new friends around, Mindy felt a sense of peace and closure she hadn't experienced in a long time. The warmth and laughter in my home multiplied with Mindy and Kristen's presence. They added a delightful energy that I recognized was healing for me. I invited them to stay, knowing how much it would help my friend rebuild the lost bond. One evening, while engrossed in paperwork in my home office, the main door squeaked open. It wasn't Jim or Mindy, and I knew this because they always announced their return cheerfully. Glancing out, I saw Nicole. She appeared weary, with slumped shoulders and dark circles under her eyes. She sighed, dropped her bags, and stretched. That trip was quite an experience. I watched her. Silently, a furrow forming on my forehead. She walked past me and slumped on the living room sofa, every move reflecting her exhaustion. Taking a deep breath, I approached her. I hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her, maintaining a bit of distance. Nicole glanced at me, trying to gauge my feelings. "Look, Robert, I know things have been complicated, but..." I raised a hand, interrupting her. "Did you have your phone sync turned on?" I asked, my voice low. Nicole looked puzzled, but realization soon crossed her face, her eyes widening in shock. I swallowed hard, holding back my emotions. "I saw the pictures, Nicole. I didn't need to see more than a few to understand." She moved closer, desperation in her eyes. "Robert, please listen. It's not how it seems. We were just..." I stood up abruptly, cutting her off. "I wish I hadn't seen those photos, Nicole, but now that I have, things can never be the same. I can't. I won't pretend everything's okay." Nicole's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Robert, just give me a chance to explain." I shook my head. "I think it's best if you leave, please." Nicole's tone escalated, her frustration evident. "So, this is it? You won't even hear me out? Fine, leave. But just remember, no one will ever stand by you the way I did. No one will love you like I did." The sound of the front door creaking open interrupted the tension in the room. Jim, having just entered, froze, realizing the gravity of the situation. He decided to give them some privacy and quietly retreated, gently closing the door behind him. Nicole's demeanor shifted as her attempts to assert herself failed. She appeared genuinely remorseful. "Robert, I'm truly sorry," she whispered. While I acknowledged her apology, I firmly requested that she leave. As Nicole exited, a cheerful Kristen was playing on the lawn. She spied me and rushed over, hugging my legs tightly. The innocent embrace seemed to emphasize the contrast between the past and a potential future. Nicole watched, taking in the scene. A pang of realization struck her. Perhaps someone else would indeed offer me the love and respect I deserved, something she had been unable to provide.
I'm Steve, and my wife's Kate. We've been married for more than 3 years. The first year was really happy, the second was good, and the third had some issues. It might seem silly or childish. I can't say I disagree, but I'm not sure if you would react differently. We were in the middle of an argument. We've had a lot of those lately, Kate and I, but this one was really bad. I don't even know what it was about. Something small like the laundry or an unpaid bill. Kate has this habit of bringing up irrelevant complaints during arguments, things that have nothing to do with what we're fighting about. It could be stuff from years ago, like when I didn't pick up her sister from a party, or just random things that occurred to her to hit me with. This was one of those times. And you just never stop talking. Do you know that, Steve? She said this in a harsh tone. Nothing makes you happier than the sound of your own voice. Even when we're relationships, you never stay quiet. There was silence. Kate must have seen from my face that she went too far. I was hurt, so I just looked at her. I thought about saying I had no idea my talking during closeness bothered her. It's how I express my love and excitement. But then I decided not to say anything. Kate continued, saying my talking distracts her during closeness and turns her off. I was surprised. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? We've been married for over 3 years, and I thought she enjoyed my affectionate words. She talked less than I did in bed, but she always said a few words. After a long silence, I stood up and told Kate I'd try to only speak when it's important. Then I left the room. Update. I wasn't proud of my actions afterward. All I can say is I felt really hurt. The unexpected argument hit me hard. I thought if she wanted silence, then she would get silence. Our fights were getting worse. Despite still loving Kate, we found it harder to be content with each other. There were fewer happy times and more tense moments and arguments over small things. A major issue was my job as a sales rep for a plumbing supply company, requiring me to travel for about 3 minutes, 4 days a month. Kate didn't like me being away so much, but she knew this before we got married. She also wanted to start a family, which I resisted for another 2 years. I expected a promotion that would let me stop traveling. I just didn't want to have a baby until I could be home all the time. So, those were the big issues. Lately, even tiny things seemed to trigger fights. The reservoir of love and goodwill seemed almost empty, and I didn't know why. One thing Kate said kept bothering me, that my talking during closeness was the opposite of what turned her on. Did that mean she was enjoying closeness with someone else? Someone who didn't talk? It seemed far-fetched until I thought about it more. During my last trip, about 10 days earlier, I couldn't reach her on the phone twice. The second time, she had her cell phone switched off when she should have been back from work. The next day, she said she went for a beer with friends, which seemed reasonable, except I called the house about 10:30, and she was still out. Also, in the past month, 3 times I answered the phone, and the person hung up. Not a big deal, but it rarely happened before. So, I got more suspicious and took action. For the next 2 weeks, Kate probably thought she was living with a mute. No small talk, no idle conversation, no words unless absolutely necessary. Instead of saying, "Could you pass the salt, honey?" I got up and got it myself. In response to, "What's the weather going to be like today?" I passed her the weather page of the newspaper. If she asked me to make dinner that night, all she got was, "Okay." When she left for work and said, "Goodbye, honey," I gave her a smile and a wave. It became a game to see how few words I could say to her in a day. Kate knew I was angry and hurt, and she knew why. At first, she didn't seem to care much, but after that, she started trying to make up. She didn't exactly apologize. That was rare in our house, but she became much more affectionate. Kisses greeted me in bed in the morning, on the way out for work, and at bedtime. Sometimes, she leaned over to give me a hug while I was reading the paper over coffee in the morning, or rubbed my shoulders while we were watching TV. It was a funny thing, even as my anger gradually calmed down, and nobody can stay white-hot angry. Over days, I kept saying as little as possible before speaking. I'd ask myself if I really needed to say it, and usually the answer was no. I was listening more, observing more, and keeping my thoughts to myself. About 10 days after the argument, Kate suggested we make love. Whether she wanted to or it was part of making up, I couldn't tell. After dinner, during which she told me some stories about work, and I spoke no more than 6 minutes, 8 words, she stood up and took me by the hand, urging me to leave the dishes for later. With a big, warm smile, She conveyed that there was something else she needed at that moment. As she led me back to the bedroom, I wondered if the distance between us had grown because of my silence, or if I was silent because we had already drifted so far apart. During the entire encounter, I hadn't uttered a word. As we coupled smoothly, easily, and familiarly, I remained completely silent, feeling a sense of unnatural coldness and distance. I wasn't even sure if it was what Kate truly wanted, but after that argument, I had no intention of saying a word. After we finished, I rolled off her, and she snuggled into me, emitting a happy without any verbal communication. We relaxed together for a while, still without exchanging any words. I couldn't discern what the experience had been like for her. For me, it felt cold and empty, and whether that was due to the silence or the growing distance between us remained uncertain. Update. After a few more days of minimal conversation, Kate became upset with me. One night during dinner, she expressed frustration, questioning my silence and whether I had anything to say. After a moment of thought, I responded that I thought this was what she wanted. She clarified, explaining that she desired a husband who communicates and shares feelings, not someone resembling a mannequin from a department store. Privately, I chuckled, thinking, "Good one, Kate." Last week, she had complained about me talking too much, so I'm making an effort to rectify that. Kate accused me of taking the silent treatment too far, labeling it the Silent Sam routine. I looked at her for a moment before speaking. Some of my confusion was intended to annoy her, and partly I was genuinely puzzled. I honestly didn't know what she wanted. First, I talked too much, then too little. How am I supposed to know what to do now? She glared at me, clearly very angry, insisting that I stop and be the man she married. I regretted my earlier words, stating that she doesn't talk too much. We were arguing, I was upset, and I just threw that at her again. After a pause, I added, "All right, Kate, but I have to admit your words got me thinking that maybe I do talk too much, or without thinking first about whether I really have anything to say." After a moment, I smiled at her, saying, "In a way, all this has been helpful." She smiled back warmly, her anger seemingly gone, and for a moment, I felt the closeness between us that had been missing. I then brought up the topic of making love, genuinely seeking to understand. I asked if she meant what she said about not talking during closeness. Rather than answering my question, Kate left the table for the rest of the evening. She gave me the cold shoulder, which didn't seem fair. Despite my honest attempt to understand her feelings, the next morning brought a more hopeful atmosphere. Kate had stepped back from her initial attack, expressing a desire for communication. Unfortunately, her focus remained on the end of the conversation, evident in her glares and tight-lipped phrases at breakfast. We endured a few more days of minimal communication, ironic this time, as she was giving me the silent treatment. After 3 to 4 days, Kate's mood drastically changed again. She came home from work looking very upset and headed straight for the shower. Over dinner, she was distracted, saying little and frequently losing track of my conversation. This wasn't the angry silent treatment anymore. She was clearly preoccupied with something. But when I asked her if something was wrong, and I asked several times, she only mentioned a problem at work. I noticed, though, that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. Unsure of what was bothering her, I decided to wait and see. The next day, I received a call at work. Ernie Matazzolo confirmed my suspicions about Kate having an affair. I thanked him, left work, and went home. Looking at the photos, the only surprise was the guy, Adam, who hadn't been my best man, but was one of my groomsmen. He had always admired Kate, and I'd never considered him a threat. I felt cold and empty, like the last time Kate and I were in bed together. I sat for a long time, contemplating everything, and pulled out the photos, finding them unchanged from the first time I put them away. Update. When Kate arrived home, she found me seated on the couch, seemingly idle. I remained quiet as she greeted me, my expression crafted to appear neutral rather than angry. Her inquiry about my unusual behavior grew more pointed, a blend of concern and annoyance evident in her edgier tone. As she probed further, sensing that something was amiss, I maintained my silence. Frustration welled within her as she pressed for an explanation, insinuating a return to the silent treatment of the past. In response, I sat up, cutting through the tension with a direct question. I asked her how long she had been dating him. "Kate, taken aback, recoiled in shock and retreated a step. Perplexed, she took a seat across from me, seeking to understand my accusation. Her attempts to read my expression proved futile. The atmosphere thickened as she continued to deny any involvement with someone else. Clasping her hands tightly in her lap, she implored me to reveal the source of my accusations. Her plea, laden with frustration, suggested that I harbored a guilty conscience. Unyielding, I presented an envelope containing a photograph, a damning image of Kate on Adam's bed. She looked at it briefly, dropped it in surprise, and recoiled as though it were a threat. Blushing, she retreated into her chair, avoiding eye contact. In the face of my persistent silence, she decided to change the subject, heading for the bedroom. However, I intercepted her with the incriminating photo. She hesitated, and unable to escape my unrelenting gaze, she finally met my eyes with a silent plea. "How long?" I reiterated. Her response was a withdrawal into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her as she shook her head. The silence lingered, and she eventually appealed to me, requesting that I spare her from discussing the matter. Declaring my decision to leave, I moved towards the bedroom to pack. In a desperate plea, she implored me to wait, promising to disclose everything. Relenting, I resumed my seat, observing her as she struggled to maintain eye contact. Unable to endure the silence, she confessed, apologizing and expressing remorse. As she pleaded with me not to leave, I remained seated, meeting her gaze with an unwavering expression. She averted her eyes, and after a moment, she mustered the courage to look back at me, tearfully admitting that Adam had told her I was also involved. Surprised, I refrained from questioning her and gestured for her to continue. Kate explained that a month earlier, she had encountered Adam at the supermarket. He, being charming and friendly, had offered her companionship in my absence, arriving at our house with pizza and wine. They spent a casual evening together, misled by Adam's claim that I, too, was engaged in similar actions. Towards the end, he started acting worried and concerned. When Kate questioned him about it, he claimed I had been unfaithful. He did an impressive job at acting, appearing reluctant with his head hanging, avoiding eye contact with me. According to him, you and he had a conversation a couple of weeks earlier where you confessed about a girl you were involved with during your trips. He provided convincing details about her appearance, where you met, and how great you said she was in bed. I started crying, and Adam consoled me, expressing admiration for my beauty and handsomeness. He couldn't fathom how any man could cheat on me and vowed to do anything to make me feel better. A little while later, we ended up in bed together, and I only found out yesterday that the entire story was false. I waited, expressionless. She continued, her expression now more somber than before. I found myself in his apartment, having shared in relationships moment. With a smug demeanor, he brought up the notion that if it weren't for Steve's involvement with Julia, we wouldn't have realized how well we connect. I raised the issue of inconsistency, reminding him that during our initial conversation about your lover, he had mentioned the name Joanne. He couldn't recall any of the details, like her appearance or how you met. Frustrated, I screamed at him to tell me the truth. "Did you really cheat on me?" He laughed, admitting it was just a story to get in my pants. Kate's face turned red with anger. I angrily got up, threw on my clothes, and berated him, calling him out for making a fool out of me. He lay there, smiling, unapologetic or remorseful for his actions. I couldn't believe what I had done, and suddenly she couldn't speak, sobbing with her face in her hands and her body heaving. The urge to comfort Kate was overshadowed by a cold emptiness. Was she truly that naive, or had our love deteriorated to the point where she was willing to believe even the most absurd stories? Then there was my rage at Adam, a friend of 15 years. I sat in silence while Kate sobbed. After about 5 minutes, I stood up. Kate watched me fearfully. I took her cell phone from her purse, put it in my pocket, and went to the bedroom and kitchen, unplugging the phones and putting them in a bag under my arm. Before departing, I glanced back at Kate and conveyed that I would return. I instructed her not to leave and cautioned against engaging in conversations with anyone. Despite my quiet tone, she appeared terrified and affirmed my instructions with a nod. Update. On the way to Adam's, I focused on controlling my breath to appear calm and friendly. When Adam opened his door, he seemed surprised and nervous. Without hesitation, I invited him for a couple of beers and suggested watching the Phillies since Kate was at a meeting. Though he observed me carefully, he put on a friendly demeanor and agreed to my proposal. We sat in his living room, chatting amiably while the game played in the background. Keeping the conversation light, I noticed Adam gradually relaxing, thinking it was a casual visit. However, I remained uncertain about the situation. It took more than an hour to steer the conversation toward closeness. I inquired about the ladies he was dating, making him momentarily nervous, but my reassuring smile prompted him to share details about a girl from work he'd been seeing. Casually, I mentioned a talkative college girlfriend, and Adam took the bait, agreeing that actions speak louder than words during relationships moments. Laughing, he boasted about revealing the desires of many girls, expressing satisfaction. Leaning in, I asked about Kate's preferences, catching him off guard. After a moment of shock, he agreed to be quiet, and I reassured him with a smile. He remained silent, looking at me fearfully. Expressing my disbelief, I confronted him about betraying our friendship and deceiving my wife to have an affair with her. Downplaying it, he claimed it wasn't a big deal, arguing she's just a woman. He trailed off, uncertainly looking at my face. Staring at him in disbelief, I questioned how I had ever been friends with him. Asserting that things were better now, I insisted he tell me everything about his deceitful game with Kate. Having already talked to her, I warned that lying wouldn't work. Wide-eyed and genuinely afraid, Adam nodded at me, signaling his readiness to talk. He recounted the story, aligning closely with what Kate had said. He had always found her attractive and had been flirting with her for several months. Whenever he encountered her, he was single. One week, he bumped into her at the supermarket and saw a chance. Initially thinking he could seduce her, he fabricated a story about my affair when it became apparent she wouldn't cheat on me. He deliberately angered her and made her feel sorry for herself, making it easy to get her into bed. They met about 5 more times, always at his place. The first encounter wasn't great because she was upset about my alleged affair. She cried. However, the subsequent times were fantastic, exactly as he described. When he noticed my disapproval, he abruptly stopped talking. I had cut his hair almost to the roots by then, finding satisfaction in picturing him hiding his head with hats for weeks. Coldly, I inquired if it was over. After a brief hesitation, he admitted it was, and shared that she found out about the fabricated story. Unable to recall the name of the supposed girl I was dating, she got angry and left. I was ready to leave, feeling empty. Although I could have pressed for more details, I decided against it. I informed Adam that our friendship was over, warning against retaliation. We agreed not to involve the police. He nodded, looking more humiliated than angry, and requested to be released. Smiling, I assured him I'd leave the apartment door open, allowing him to free himself in about an hour. I walked away without turning back. Update. Upon my return, Kate was seated on the couch in her bathrobe, her wet hair indicating recent distress. As I moved around the apartment fixing the phones, she remained visibly scared and unhappy. Taking a seat across from her, we exchanged glances, but I maintained my silence. Eventually, she inquired about my actions, to which I explained the conversation with Adam, assuring her that I hadn't resorted to violence and expressing doubt about hearing from him anytime soon. Despite acknowledging that she almost wished I had confronted him physically, she recognized the potential consequences. Troubled, she sought to move past the situation, admitting her foolishness and asking for forgiveness. I looked at her for a prolonged moment before responding, our pattern of saying very little to each other becoming a habit. "I don't know," I finally replied, and it was an honest admission. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to cry. The following morning, Kate entered the kitchen, expressing delight at the breakfast and coffee set on the table. Her joy faded abruptly upon noticing the 2 large suitcases near the door. Distraught, she questioned my departure, pleading with me not to leave. Instead of leaving without a word, I served her a cup of coffee and persuaded her to sit across from me. "Kate, it's over," I declared. I admitted uncertainty about what had transpired or why, but emphasized that our relationship had deteriorated. Despite acknowledging our initial compatibility, I highlighted a year of impatience, snappiness, and constant fighting. I pointed out that her choice to believe Adam's dubious story about my infidelity and her subsequent actions indicated a departure from the woman I had married. I suggested she must have been on the verge of straying for our relationship to reach this point. Pausing, I waited for her response, but she cried silently, holding her face in her hands. When I ceased speaking, she looked up at me, pleadingly. I offered her an opportunity to speak, to prove me wrong, to outline a path to revive our love. Regrettably, she remained silent, merely gazing at me and crying. I headed to the door, bidding her farewell as I picked up my suitcases and departed.
My wife cheated on me right before my eyes, destroying our marriage. The consequences were inevitable. I often wonder if I'm the perfect husband. My job demands a lot from me, and there are times when I come home feeling a bit down. I might not be rolling in cash, but we manage to live comfortably. Our home is nice, we have 2 decent cars, my wife has a wardrobe full of stylish clothes, and our 8-year-old daughter Vanessa has plenty of expensive toys. At the end of the day, I see myself as a simple, hardworking man who deeply loves his family. Gloria and I have enjoyed almost 12 years of marital happiness. However, recently something seems off between us, a subtle shift that's hard to pinpoint. Gloria has been distant, showing an aloofness I've never seen before. She's been quick to find fault with me over small things, which isn't like her at all. I've tried talking to her about it, asking if something's bothering her that she's not telling me, but like many spouses, she brushes it off, blaming her behavior on tiredness or a tough day. Initially, I gave her space to sort through her troubles, but her detached attitude is starting to grate on my nerves. Besides, any married couple knows that problems with your spouse often spill over into the bedroom. I've always tried to keep our love life exciting and spontaneous. Being a romantic, I used to surprise Gloria with things like bringing home roses after work to set the mood. In the past, these gestures usually led to carnal moments later on. However, lately my efforts seem to be met with just a thank you and a quick kiss instead of appreciating them. It's like Gloria sees them as me trying to make up for something. For weeks now, Gloria hasn't shown any interest in closeness, and when I try to initiate, she either isn't in the mood or claims to have a headache. Even when she does agree, she's passive, leaving me to do all the work. As time goes on, I find myself pulling away mentally. I spend time with our daughter when I get home and try to avoid interacting with Gloria as much as possible, which only makes things worse. Feeling desperate, I've spent time at work trying to figure out what might have caused Gloria's behavior, but my introspection hasn't given me any answers. I've replayed countless scenarios in my head, trying to understand why Gloria is acting this way. The more I think about it, the more I can't shake the idea that she might be having an affair. I try to reassure myself that she'd never betray our marriage, but the thought won't go away. So I've started researching signs of infidelity, looking for any changes in behavior or routines. I haven't noticed any significant shifts, but most of my interactions with her are in the evenings. Who knows what she's like during the day? Still, some of the signs of infidelity seem uncomfortably familiar, especially her changed attitude towards me. I've thought about hiring a private investigator, but without concrete evidence, it feels premature and unjustified. All I have are suspicions, not enough to justify the expense of a PI, so I started investigating on my own. Trying small tactics like calling home during the day to check if Gloria was there, but the results were inconsistent. Taking matters into my own hands, I got an old surveillance camera to discreetly set up under the eaves of our garage. I connected it to a hidden tape unit behind some paint cans, hoping to monitor any unfamiliar cars approaching our home. However, after 2 weeks of surveillance, there were no signs of suspicious vehicles. Sometimes I saw Gloria leaving the house, only for her to later say she'd been home all day. However, her absences were brief, seeming too short for anything significant to happen, unless her potential lover was remarkably fast. These outings might have been just regular errands she didn't think were worth mentioning, hardly proof of an affair. As time went on, my suspicions remained despite no solid evidence. Gloria's mood worsened, and our carnal moments became rare, leaving me frustrated. With our 12th anniversary approaching, I saw a chance to inject some excitement into our marriage again. I suggested celebrating with a night out, something we hadn't done in ages. Perhaps dinner and dancing could reignite the spark between us. Eager to reconnect, we arranged for Vanessa to stay at my parents' house for the night, giving us freedom without time constraints. I booked a table at Gloria's favorite restaurant, Plato's Place. As we were seated, I hoped to bring back some of the magic from our earlier years, but Gloria seemed tense for reasons I couldn't figure out. Ordering a bottle of wine seemed to relax her, and our conversation regained its playful tone. After dinner, Gloria was eager to hit the dance floor. Though I suggested trying a new club, she wanted to go to our usual spot, a cozy venue with dim lighting and music for an older crowd. Given the atmosphere and music, it wasn't a hard choice. Dancing had always been something we enjoyed together, drawing us closer in the beginning. Finding a secluded table, we had a few drinks before hitting the dance floor with nostalgic flair. It felt like going back in time, both of us enjoying the moment. After dancing for nearly an hour, we took a break at our table. As I watched Gloria gracefully move across the floor, thoughts of closeness lingered. But my attention shifted when I noticed I wasn't the only one captivated by her presence. Across the room, an incredibly attractive man sat alone at a corner table, his eyes fixed on Gloria's every move. A twinge of concern shot through me as I witnessed what seemed like a brief interaction between them. Did they know each other? As Gloria disappeared into the restroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man's gaze lingered on me with a hint of smugness. Although we were in a dance club, I puzzled over why he was there. Solo until it occurred to me that, like Gloria, his companion was likely in the restroom. Keeping a close eye on the man while waiting for Gloria's return, I couldn't ignore the unsettling suspicion creeping back in. When Gloria asked for another glass of wine, I hesitated. The idea of her sitting alone while I went to the bar didn't sit well with me. Catching the attention of a bartender, I opted for quicker service despite feeling Gloria's disappointment. As the server approached, I had a sinking feeling that the evening was about to take a turn for the worse. It was a gut instinct I couldn't shake. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the same man still seated alone in the corner, confirming my suspicion that he was indeed by himself. "Who's the guy over there?" I asked, catching Gloria off guard. Momentarily, I thought I detected a hint of panic in her eyes before she swiftly regained her composure. "What guy?" she responded innocently, though her tone betrayed a hint of discomfort. "The guy over there," I persisted, "the one you exchanged glances with on your way to the bathroom." Gloria quickly denied it. "Honey, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't exchange glances with anyone." Just as our drinks arrived, I noticed Gloria's eyes darting past me. Turning, I saw the man approaching our table, bypassing me entirely as he addressed Gloria with a request to dance. "No thanks," I interjected sharply, my tone revealing my displeasure. His response was mocking. "I was talking to the lady," he retorted with a smirk. "Yeah, well, the lady is my wife, and I decide who she dances with," I snapped back, feeling a surge of indignation. Gloria intervened, attempting to diffuse the tension. "Darren, you're being rude," she admonished gently. "Rude? Do you even know this guy?" I demanded, catching her off guard with the question. "He's the one I was talking about. I don't know what's going on between you two, but it's incredibly disrespectful for him to approach my wife without even acknowledging me," I asserted firmly. "Had he asked if I would mind you two dancing together, I might have considered it, but now, not a chance," I declared firmly, my frustration evident. "Darren, you're being silly," Gloria retorted, her tone now edged with impatience. "There's nothing going on between this gentleman and me. Yes, we're married, but you don't own me. I'm not your slave, and if I want to dance with someone, I will." I couldn't believe my wife was speaking to me in such a disrespectful manner. It was a level of disrespect she had never shown before. Though I was seething with anger, I made a conscious effort to control my temper as she continued speaking. "Honey, I just want to have some fun," she said, her tone softening. "Gloria, it's our anniversary. I want to have fun too, but with you. Sitting here watching you dance with someone else is not my idea of fun, especially after I've asked you not to." "Dance with him," I responded, struggling to maintain composure. "Now you're right, I don't own you, and I can't stop you from dancing with him. But if you do, then you'd better get him to take you home too, because I'll be gone." After 12 years together, I could easily decipher Gloria's emotions from her expression. Despite her outward anger, I was surprised she couldn't detect the same emotions mirrored on my face. "Well, it's impolite to keep this gentleman waiting while we argue. I'm going to dance with him, and we'll discuss this later," she snapped, her words cutting through the tension. The jackass wore a triumphant smirk as he extended his hand for Gloria to take. She accepted, placing her hand in his as they made their way to the dance floor. I'm certain they didn't notice my departure as I slipped out the door before they even began to dance. By the time my cell phone rang, I was already several blocks away. "Where the hell are you?" Gloria's voice sounded contrite through the phone. "I'm heading home to pack a bag," I responded curtly. There was a moment of silence. "What do you mean, pack a bag? Where are you going?" she questioned, her tone shifting to confusion. "I don't know yet, but I need to get away from you," I stated firmly. "I've reached my limit." "You can't be serious, Darren. It was just one dance, for heaven's sake. Are you really going to throw away 12 years of marriage over this?" she pleaded. "It's not just about the dance, Gloria. Why would you stay married to someone you don't love or respect? I haven't caught you in the act, but I strongly suspect you're cheating on me, maybe with the guy you just danced with. I saw how you looked at each other when you went to the bathroom, and when he came to our table, he treated me with the same disrespect a man shows the husband of the woman he's involved with. None at all, I firmly asserted. Darren, her voice softened. I do love you and respect you. I swear there was nothing going on between that guy and me. I would never cheat on you. Why would you even think that? You've got to be kidding me. We haven't been carnal in over 2 weeks, and when we are, you're barely present. You've been irritable and short-tempered for the past 2 months. Don't tell me you respect me, because your actions tonight proved otherwise. If you're not having an affair, you're certainly acting like it, I retorted. There was a long pause before she responded. I'm sorry, Darren. I didn't realize. I'm sorry for how I acted. I'm sorry for tonight. I'm sorry I gave you reason to think I'm having an affair. Another brief pause. I guess I did glance at that guy on the way to the restroom. He was attractive. I noticed him while we were dancing too, but I'm not having an affair with him. Please, honey, please just come back and pick me up. We can talk about it. Nope. Like I said, I've had enough. I told you if you dance with that guy, you'd have to find your own way home, and I meant it. I'm pulling into our driveway right now. By the time you get home, I'll be gone. If you're having an affair, maybe you should just go home with your lover boy and forget about me. Honey, please believe me, I'm not having an affair. Look, I'll grab a cab, but please just stay there until I get home, Gloria pleaded, desperation evident in her voice, a stark contrast from earlier. We need to talk this out. Please, she begged before abruptly ending the call. Upon arriving home, I swiftly packed a bag and left the house within 12 minutes. Curiosity nagged at me. Would Gloria really take a cab home, or would the guy drop her off? I drove down the block, switched off my lights, and waited. 15 minutes later, a yellow cab pulled into the driveway. Gloria hurriedly exited and darted into the house. Satisfied with what I saw, I headed for a motel. Almost immediately, my phone began to ring again. I switched it off. Though I lacked concrete evidence of infidelity, my suspicions remained strong. I was nearly convinced that Gloria and the man she danced with knew each other. Perhaps now was the time to hire that private detective. If I wasn't at home, maybe she would seek solace from her lover. The following day, I scoured the yellow pages for the most promising private investigator. After visiting his office and providing a retainer, I headed to work. My secretary, Joan, informed me that Gloria had called 20 times already, and something was amiss. I explained our marital issues and my decision not to return her calls, instructing Joan to relay this message. I also informed the receptionist not to allow Gloria entry to the offices if she showed up. I needed to give the PI a chance to uncover the truth. Now, it was a waiting game. Later that same afternoon, Andrea, our neighbor, called. Despite my reluctance, I answered, expecting the conversation to revolve around Gloria. Darren, she began, Gloria told me about the other night. She's been trying hard to apologize, but she says you won't talk to her. That's true, I responded firmly. I have nothing to say to her. I heard a sigh on the other end. She also mentioned you suspect her of cheating on you. Do you really believe that? Unfortunately, I do, I admitted. Her behavior has been strange for over 2 months now. The incident the other night only reinforced my suspicions. Reinforced? She questioned. All she did was dance with a guy. No, that's not quite accurate. I saw them exchange glances before he came to our table. It was very disrespectful to me, and Gloria chose to support him despite my warning her about the consequences. She ignored my feelings. I'm almost certain they're romantically involved. Darren, really? I think you're jumping to conclusions. I've been your neighbor for years, and if Gloria was cheating on you, I'm pretty sure I would have noticed something. I've never seen any unfamiliar cars parked outside your house, nor have I seen any strange men coming and going. Please, she knows that dancing with that guy was a mistake. She got upset because you told her not to, but she's realized you were right. Trust me, Darren, I know Gloria, and she wouldn't cheat on you. I'm not so sure anymore, Andrea. Her actions the other night didn't exactly show love. Please, Darren, just talk to her. You won't solve anything if you don't communicate. I knew Andrea made sense, but I needed time for the private investigator to work. Andrea, do me a favor. Let her know I'll call her in a couple of weeks. I still need some time to think things over. Another sigh came through the phone. Okay, Darren, I'll pass on the message, but please promise me you'll call her then. All right, promise, I assured her. After saying goodbye, I found myself thinking once more. Andrea and her husband Jack were close friends, and I couldn't imagine Andrea lying to me. If Gloria was indeed being unfaithful, she was doing an excellent job of hiding it. For the following 2 weeks, I experienced overwhelming anxiety. I reached out to the investigator multiple times, but there were no substantial updates. Eventually, he summoned me to his office, and as I took my seat, my stomach twisted with nerves. He pushed a manila envelope towards me, and my hand shook as I lifted it. He suggested I overlook the routine details and directed me to the bottom of page 5. With shaky fingers, I flipped through the report until I reached the designated page. Could this be the evidence I desperately sought? After a thorough investigation, this office found no evidence to support the client's suspicions of infidelity by his spouse. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Unsure of how to react, I looked back up at the investigator. "Are you sure?" I asked, disbelief evident in my tone. "Mr. Barnes, my team has meticulously monitored your wife's every move over the past 2 weeks. We've observed the house, monitored her communications, and trailed her whenever she left. We've scrutinized her phone records and credit card statements. There's simply no indication of any affair," he affirmed. Relief washed over me, threatening to overwhelm me. I struggled to contain my emotions, resisting the urge to break down into tears of relief right there in his office. "Go home, Mr. Barnes," the investigator advised gently. "Return to your wife and child. In my line of work, happy endings are a rare sight." I thanked the investigator before returning to my hotel room, knowing I needed more time to think. Over the weekend, I pondered everything that had happened. By Monday morning, I felt prepared to make an important call. When Gloria answered, her voice trembled with emotion. "Hello?" "It's me," I replied. "Are you okay?" "You sound upset." There was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "Darren, oh Darren, I'm so sorry. I just don't know what to do if you don't come back to us. I've tried to be strong for Vanessa, but I can't stop crying. I'm sorry. I realize now that I took you for granted. You were right. I should have made it clear to that guy that I was with my husband and not interested. I showed you no respect, and I don't know why, because I do respect and love you. I promise, Darren, if you give me another chance, I'll never make that mistake again." Her heartfelt plea caught me off guard, a stark contrast to her behavior at the dance club. As I hesitated to respond, she jumped to a conclusion. "You're not coming back, are you?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. "No, Gloria, I am coming back," I reassured her. "But only on a trial basis. I want my wife back, the woman I fell in love with, the woman I married. She's here, Darren, truly. She's here, waiting for the man she loves," Andrea insisted, her sincerity evident in her voice. "We'll see. Despite everything I've been through, the attitude, the lack of closeness, the disrespect, I'm still not entirely convinced. Not yet." I informed her that I'd be going to the motel after work to gather my things, but I'd be home tonight. There was a moment of silence before Gloria spoke, her voice filled with remorse. "I love you, Darren. I'm deeply sorry for the way I treated you. I don't want to lose you." Despite her words, I couldn't shake off my reservations. I was still upset, and despite the evidence to the contrary, I couldn't shake the feeling that Gloria knew the man from the dance hall. After work, I collected my belongings and returned home. Vanessa greeted me enthusiastically at the door, unaware of our recent troubles. Gloria was there too, wrapping her arms around me and showering me with affectionate kisses. In that moment, as I kissed her back with fervor, I couldn't deny that I still loved my wife. That was 2 years ago, and since then, married life has been nothing short of wonderful. Gloria has once again become the woman I fell in love with, both inside and outside the bedroom. A few months back, she surprised me with a birthday party, a gesture we hadn't done much for my birthday in the past, but it became a tradition upon my return. Last night marked our 14th wedding anniversary, and this time Gloria took charge of planning the entire evening. When I arrived home from work, she greeted me with tickets to a dinner playhouse to see Man of La Mancha, one of my favorite plays. After the show, we took a leisurely drive down to the lakefront and strolled along the beach. With the moon casting its gentle glow and warm breezes blowing in from the lake, it felt like a scene out of a romantic movie. "I love you, darling," I whispered, feeling as if we were still in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. "And I love you very much, my dear," replied my adored wife, her eyes sparkling with affection. Although spring had officially arrived a couple of weeks earlier according to the calendar, it wasn't until this particular day that Gloria could venture outside without her bulky winter coat. It symbolized the definitive end of yet another harsh Chicago winter. Stepping out, Gloria deeply breathed in the fresh morning scent left by the gentle April shower overnight. A smile played on her lips as she recalled the warm, secure feeling of being cuddled by her husband in bed, listening to the soothing raindrops. On her way to the car, Gloria noticed the beautiful blue wildflowers sprouting from the lawn. their resilience in the face of winter's challenges reminding her of spring's inherent desire for renewal and fresh starts. Humming along to the tunes on the car radio, Gloria headed to the cozy coffee shop where she was meeting her friend Zara, whom she hadn't seen in a while. Zara had a son the same age as Vanessa, Gloria's daughter, and their friendship had blossomed years ago at a school event. Since then, they had remained close friends, sharing each other's joys and challenges. Zara had arrived early, securing a snug table in the corner by the window. They exchanged waves and smiles through the glass as Gloria entered. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the bustling cafe as Gloria joined the queue of customers eagerly awaiting their Colombian bliss. When Zara spotted Gloria, she rose with a grin. "Hi!" they both exclaimed, sharing a warm hug before settling into their seats. "It's been too long," Gloria remarked. "How have you been?" Zara's eyes lit up as she shared updates. They reminisced about old times, chuckling at memories from school events. Stories about their children flowed, marveling at how swiftly time had flown. As they dove into conversation, Zara leaned in, lowering her voice. "Gloria," she whispered, "can you keep a secret?" "Absolutely," Gloria replied, miming locking her lips and tossing the key. "What's up?" "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," Zara confessed, excitement evident. "But I've been, well, seeing this guy." Gloria's coffee paused midway to her lips as she stared at her friend in surprise. "Wait, are you saying you're considering an affair?" Zara flashed a mischievous half-smile. "Well, we haven't crossed any lines yet, but I'm seriously thinking about it. It's Eric. He's different, you know. He makes me feel alive, but I'm worried he might lose interest if I don't take it further." "Wait," interjected Gloria, concern in her voice. "Have you thought about the consequences? Are you ready to risk your marriage for him?" Zara shrugged, a hint of nonchalance in her tone. "Oh, I'm not talking about leaving Nick or anything. It's just a bit of excitement on the side, the spice of life, as they say," she remarked with a smile. "And don't worry, I'm sure Nick will never find out. He'd be devastated if he knew. Plus, Eric's married. 2, we have to be discreet." Gloria grappled with a surge of anxiety, torn between her loyalty to her friend and her own moral compass. After harboring her own secret for 2 years, she decided to confide in Zara. "Zara, remember a couple of years back when Darren and I went through a rough patch? He actually left me for a while, remember?" "Yeah, I do, but you never really opened up about it. I didn't want to pry," Zara replied. "I never told anyone, and you have to swear not to breathe a word of what I'm about to tell you to another living soul," Gloria said, her tone serious. Zara nodded solemnly. "Of course, Gloria, I promise. If this ever got out, it could ruin my marriage. That's why I've kept it buried. But, well, you need to hear it before you make any decisions that could jeopardize your own marriage." Gloria paused as the waitress refilled their coffee cups, then continued, her voice low and urgent. "I'm probably not so different from most other married women out there. After 12 years of marriage, I started feeling, bored. Everything was becoming routine. It was like after all those years I looked around and realized, what am I doing? Where am I going? Nowhere. I felt stuck, like I had no real life of my own." "Exactly," Zara interjected, her eyes showing understanding. "I know exactly how you feel. Zara, I think most women experience something similar. It's not that you don't love your husband. I adore Darren with all my heart. But suddenly, it's like something's missing. I started feeling like I was slipping into a slight depression. Nothing felt exciting anymore, not even lovemaking. And it wasn't anyone's fault. Darren was doing everything he could for me, especially in the bedroom. I should have been over the moon, but nothing seemed to lift my spirit, not even school functions." Gloria took a moment to sip her coffee, gauging Zara's reaction. Seeing her friend's attentive expression, she continued, "And then I met Louis." You had an affair?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gloria nodded solemnly. "An emotional affair, yes. Thankfully, I came to my senses before it turned physical. Thank goodness," she added with a heavy sigh. "I was at that little grocery store on Marshall Avenue one day, and there he was. Oh, Zara, he was absolutely stunning, with his rugged good looks, sandy blonde hair, and those mesmerizing blue eyes that sparkled like Robert Redford's. And tall, too. I'm certain he was well over 6 feet. Even with his clothes on, I could tell he had a nice build. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him until he caught me, of course. I felt myself blushing as he smiled back at me. We began flirting, and it was thrilling, almost forbidden. But eventually, I snapped out of it. I needed to focus on my shopping, so I made my way to the produce aisle. As I reached for some tomatoes, I accidentally bumped into him. He looked at me with those captivating blue eyes and that charming smile and greeted me. Zara, I hate to admit it, but I could feel myself getting aroused. It was so embarrassing. I prayed he couldn't sense the scent I was giving off. I must have been blushing profusely. He offered his hand for a shake and introduced himself. Despite seeing my wedding rings, he wasn't discouraged from trying to pursue me. It was flattering to think that a man like him could be interested in me. We conversed and laughed as we moved through the aisles collecting our groceries. At the checkout, he confidently gave me his number and proposed lunch for the following week. Zara listened intently to Gloria's narrative, finding it strangely familiar. I almost threw away his card as I left the store. I thought, sure, we'll have a passionate love affair and then my husband will catch us. But I didn't. What didn't you do? Zara inquired, intrigued. I didn't toss his card. I kept it in my purse. Wow. On the way home, all I could think about was Louis. Darren arrived while I was putting away the groceries. I already felt guilty, so I snapped at him when he tried to help. It was like some unconscious defense mechanism. Poor Darren just asked if something was wrong. Oh my God, what did you tell him? I lied, naturally. I said I was just a little tired from shopping. Truthfully, I was secretly ecstatic. Anyway, Gloria continued, I knew I shouldn't call him. It was wrong. I also knew I was feeling vulnerable. I kept telling myself no, but I couldn't resist. I found one of the last payphones in the city and dialed the number on his card. We agreed to meet for lunch the next day. With anticipation, Zara waited for Gloria to take another sip of coffee before proceeding. Zara, as we headed to the restaurant, my emotions were all over the place. I felt a mix of terror, excitement, and intense desire. At one point, Louis reached across the table and held my hand. I felt a strong urge to be carnal with him, but guilt, or maybe fear, stopped me. Nonetheless, I couldn't act on it. But Louis persisted. He subtly belittled Darren, making me question our relationship. Foolishly, I fell for it, finding myself resenting my own husband. Before I knew it, Louis had cleverly manipulated me into thinking Darren didn't appreciate me. Your situation sounds so similar, Gloria, Zara commented. That's why I'm telling you this, Zara. I want you to realize what you might be getting into. Has your guy mentioned Nick yet? Not much, Zara replied, pausing. Well, he's asked a few questions like, does your husband realize how lucky he is? Stuff like that. I understand, Gloria nodded knowingly. And now you're starting to wonder, right? Well, Zara, it's amazing how things can go unnoticed. When Darren left, he mentioned I'd been distant for over 2 months. I hadn't even realized. Same with our closeness, I couldn't feel passion. With someone I felt was taking me for granted. As Gloria recounted her experience, she saw realization dawn in Zara's eyes. Think about it, Zara. What kind of man would have an affair with a married woman? Can you imagine Nick doing that? Nick? No way, he wouldn't do that, Zara firmly replied. Exactly, so why put your marriage at risk for someone like that? Gloria posed the question pointedly. As Zara pondered Gloria's words, Gloria continued her story. Anyway, we met for lunch again the next week, and with each meeting it became harder to stay faithful to Darren. By our third lunch, he nearly convinced me to go back to his place. I sensed his frustration with my excuses, and I knew if we met for lunch once more, we'd end up in bed together. As we left the restaurant after our third lunch, I casually mentioned needing a new dress because Darren had planned a special anniversary outing. I hinted that we might go to a dance club we used to enjoy, reminiscing about our past fun there. Lou saw an opportunity and seized it. He insisted on joining us at the club, saying he'd dance with me. I cautioned him, reminding him it was our anniversary and dancing with someone else might upset Darren. But Louis, in his arrogance, dismissed my concerns, claiming it would teach Darren a lesson. He wanted to show Darren that other men desired me, thinking it would make Darren appreciate me more. Oh my, Gloria, he really showed up at Dee's? Zara asked, astonished. Gloria took a sip of her coffee before replying. He did indeed. I spotted him as soon as we arrived. Naturally, I ignored him. Darren and I were having a good time until Louis approached asking me to dance. Oh my goodness, Zara gasped, shocked. Yep. And to make matters worse, he completely disregarded Darren, even being rude to him. Naturally, Darren was offended and gave me an ultimatum, saying I couldn't dance with Louis. You know how stubborn I can be, Gloria said. I got upset and insisted on dancing with him anyway. Darren warned me he wouldn't be there when we finished, but who takes such threats seriously, right? Zara observed Gloria's eyes welling with emotion as she continued. As we hit the dance floor, I confronted Louis about his behavior toward Darren. I asked why he had to be so disrespectful, to which he replied that he wanted to put Darren in his place. That just made me angrier. Of course, Louis kept me close while we danced, but I was mainly concerned with whether Darren was watching and getting angrier. I was so preoccupied, I didn't notice when the first dance ended and we started the second. When the music stopped, I told Louis no more dances. I said I was going to spend the rest of the evening with my husband. As I headed back to our table, I saw Louis trailing behind me. I demanded to know what he thought he was doing, and he said he wanted to apologize to Darren. When we got back, Darren was gone. Louis sat down and casually mentioned he'd wait with me until Darren returned. I had a sinking feeling he had no intention of apologizing. Instead, he seemed bent on stirring up trouble between Darren and me. Why would he do that? Zara asked, puzzled. Or what would he gain from it? I wondered the same, Gloria replied, guessing. He hadn't succeeded in seducing me, so he tried to create discord between Darren and me instead. He probably hoped I'd turn to him for comfort, expecting we'd end up together before the night was over. I assumed Darren had gone to the restroom. I urged Louis to return to his table, but he hesitated. When the waitress approached, he took the chance to order drinks. It was then she asked if we wanted to start another tab. I was stunned. Darren had already paid the bill before leaving. With Zara, it felt like I was witnessing my entire married life unravel. I couldn't fathom he'd left me like that. Gloria's anguish was palpable as she recounted her tale, and Zara couldn't help but feel her friend's pain. Emotions swirled within Zara, and soon a solitary tear trickled down her cheek. You don't have to tell me all this, Gloria, Zara said, her voice thick with empathy. You're upset. Maybe we should pause. No, I need to tell you everything, Zara, Gloria insisted, her resolve clear. You need the full picture. It's crucial. She paused, gathering herself. So, where was I? Right. I immediately dialed Darren, asking him to return and pick me up. That's when he dropped the bombshell. He suspected I was having an affair, possibly with Louis. He said he was considering packing a bag and leaving, uncertain if he'd come back. Gloria reached for a napkin, wiping away tears that welled in her eyes. It hit me like a ton of bricks, Zar, she continued. It was like a sudden realization. Everything became clear. It wasn't Darren taking me for granted. He'd done everything to support me. It was me. I was the one taking him, Vanessa, and our life together for granted. I realized I was risking my entire marriage for some idiot. I pleaded with Darren to return so we could talk, but he refused, so I hailed a cab. What was Louis doing during all this? Zara asked. Oh, he wasn't giving up. Not yet. He insisted Darren didn't deserve me and pressed me to go home with him instead. I shut him down promptly, she recounted with a laugh. But he persisted. He followed me outside and made advances as the cab arrived. I didn't hesitate to give him a knee to the groin. Doubled over in pain, I warned further contact would lead to a closeness intimidation lawsuit. Zara reached out, gripping her friend's hand as Gloria brushed away more tears. By the time I got home, Darren was gone. I tried calling, but his phone was off. Zara, I was terrified. I could see my marriage crumbling before my eyes. Everything we built, our whole family, seemed on the brink of collapse. I've never been so scared. The next day, I tried reaching him at work, but he refused to talk. His secretary said he'd instructed her not to see me if I came by. Feeling desperate, I turned to Andrea, my neighbor. Given Darren's good relationship with her and her husband, I hoped she might convince him to talk to me. Surprisingly, he did speak to her, but only to express the need for time to think and a promise to contact me in a couple of weeks. Understanding that pressuring him would backfire, I opted to grant him the space he requested. Those 2 weeks were agonizing. Whenever Vanessa was around, I forced a facade of strength, telling her that Daddy was away. But in private, tears flowed freely. I feared I had irreversibly damaged our bond. Gloria paused, her voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry, she said to Zara, wiping tears. It's still hard to discuss even now. Taking a deep breath, she resumed her narrative. As I was saying, Darren finally called and said he was coming home. Zara, I was on the brink of losing everything. And let me tell you, it made me realize the worth of what I had and how incredibly lucky I was. Ultimately, Zara, love must triumph over desire. I love Darren, and he loves me. In my view, no man is worth risking that for. Wow, Zara responded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right. I can't imagine what I would do if my husband left me. Did you ever confess the truth to Darren? Are you kidding? After nearly losing him, I couldn't risk a repeat. Zara, I live in constant fear of him uncovering the truth. But since he returned home, I've worked hard to be the best wife I can be. I no longer take him or our marriage for granted. Every day I count my blessings and express my gratitude to Darren with all my heart. I can only hope it's enough if he ever does learn the truth. Zara squeezed Gloria's hand reassuringly. I'm so thankful you shared your story with me, Gloria. You've saved me from a huge mistake. Thank you. The two friends talked a bit longer, then tentatively set their next meeting before saying goodbye. Gloria felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing she had just steered her friend away from a disastrous choice. She made it home just in time to welcome her daughter with a kiss and a snack after school. Vanessa is growing up so fast, she reflected. She'll be 10 soon. Where does the time go? When Darren returned from work, Gloria greeted her husband with warm hugs and kisses. Until that day, she had never brought up the topic of their challenging period in their marriage. Talking to Zara reminded her of the wonderful life she and Darren had built together. Later that night, with Darren peacefully sleeping beside her, Gloria turned on her side and propped herself up on her elbow. She studied the lines on his face, each representing the passage of time and cherished memories. With gentle fingers, she traced a few of the newer lines, feeling affection and admiration for the man beside her. Softly, Gloria kissed him. As their kiss deepened, Darren's lips curved into a wide smile. He embraced his beloved wife tightly, returning her affection with a passionate kiss. "I thought you were asleep," Gloria whispered. "Actually, I was thinking about what to get Vanessa for her birthday," he replied. "Do you know what she really needs?" "What?" Gloria asked. "A baby brother or sister," Darren declared. Though not entirely surprising, the suggestion of expanding their family brought a smile to Gloria's face. It seemed her husband had made the decision for them. "Well, her birthday is only 2 months away, honey. Shouldn't we start?" Gloria teased. Darren's grin widened. "You read my mind." 2 months later, Vanessa celebrated her 10th birthday with a big party in the backyard. Mom and Dad invited all her friends, making sure there was plenty of ice cream and cake for everyone. After the festivities, Gloria and Darren surprised their daughter with another special gift and the joyful news of an upcoming baby brother.